with our agenda. We're going to go back a little bit and maybe have an open discussion. I got some people who'd like to comment a little bit about what went on here yesterday. So I call it good of the order. Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last night I was lying awake in bed reflecting on what was a very full day, a very informative day. And I kind of came full circle the way that you opened the meeting yesterday with a very good question. And that question is, why in Wyoming do we spend double what Utah spends and 40% or more what every state around us spends, and yet our composite NAEP scores are virtually indistinguishable from our neighbors? And one working hypothesis, and one of the reasons that we had this recalibration, was speculation that perhaps we asked more of our educational system than other states. What we learned yesterday is that the content standards in Wyoming are nearly identical to our surrounding neighbors and to those other high-performing states that were chosen. So we come full circle again this morning to the question of, why are we spending so much for outcomes that are not distinguishable from our neighbors? More importantly, what is the answer to getting more bang for our buck educationally? Is it the proportion of money that's spent on administration versus direct instruction? Is it professional learning communities? I don't know that we know that answer. I do know that we have got to keep outcomes and student attainment in front of us every bit as much as we do the money that we spend. We head into this session under the possible threat of a lawsuit from the districts over the amount of money that we spend. We learned yesterday from our attorney that we're also vulnerable to a lawsuit from parents saying, regardless of the money you spend, it's the educational outcome that some of these students are not getting. 50% of the Wyoming graduates going to community college put into remedial math. 60% or more of our students not rated as proficient in math and reading. And for all of our expenditures, we're now vulnerable to a lawsuit from a parent saying, regardless of expenditure, whatever you're doing, you got to do it better and faster. And I know that's tough to hear sometimes, but there are a lot of kids out there that really need to be prepared for the future. And I know every teacher, every superintendent, every principal feels it for every student that doesn't succeed, and they want passionately to know what is the answer. And the answer is not just money. I don't know what it is, but I'm committed to continuing the search. But I think we kind of come full circle from where we started yesterday, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kinski. Anybody else like?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on that a little bit, and I think we did have good discussion yesterday, but I'm still concerned with the concept that's being promoted that we're not getting our bang for the buck. I'm concerned because, again, when you look at the data and you look at the aggregated NAEP score and you compare it with 10 years ago when we started this process and really started to fully fund education in the state of Wyoming, we're doing a lot better. We were middle of the pack, and we were at that time relatively indistinguishable from our neighbors and from sort of the middle of the country in terms of performance on NAEP scores. But Mr. Chairman, over the last 10 years, we've improved that dramatically to the point where now we are distinguishable from our neighbors. We definitely spend more than they do. There's no question about that. It would be nice if we could find a magical solution that allowed us to spend the same as they do and perform as well as we do. That's why we hired these three esteemed individuals to tell us if there is that path forward. But the reality is that we've gotten to the point where our aggregated NAEP score in 2015 was 4th in the country. 4th behind 3 states, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont, that spend as much or more as we do on education on a per student basis. So anecdotally, we seem to think we're doing poorly, and we keep hearing that repeated over and over again. But it is not borne out by the data. Yes, we clearly want to improve our graduation rates. Those aren't good enough. We want 4 years of math, Mr. Chairman. We know that that'll bump us up a little bit further, and there are things that we know we can do. But to continue to say that we're not getting that bang for the buck when we have dramatically improved our performance in a rural state with a transient population over the last decade is not accurate. And when we're looking at whether we want to continue this high level of performance and high level of funding, we need to be going into it with the accurate facts, and the data does not bear out the anecdote that we're not performing.
Thank you. I too disagree with with good Senator Kinski. You know, I've had LSO create a chart, and if you think about education and outcomes, you first have to look at the demographics. It's like a football team. So if the good coach here at this table were to take his good team, his great team, down to the middle of Florida and play some of those teams, chances are it wouldn't be a great outcome. And it's the same way in education. You have to look at the demographics. So let's take a look at the demographics. And so if you think about in Wyoming, where do our kids come from? Our kids come from the result of the mineral industry that we have in this state. So our demographics are really tied to the people who work in this state in the minerals industry. And so if you look at us as mining as a percentage of state GDP, so mining included oil and gas, Wyoming has the highest percentage of state GDP related to minerals. And we are, according to Ed Week, we're rated 20th with regard to achievement. Our expenditures is 8th. If you look at the second one, it's Alaska. So the second one that they're mining is the second highest percentage of state GDP with respect to mining. It's Alaska. They're number 2. They're ranked in achievement 45th. If you go to the third ranking state, West Virginia, they're ranked achievement 48th. Remember, Wyoming's 20. If you go to the fourth ranking state, Oklahoma, they're ranked on for achievement 39. Remember, Wyoming's 20. You go to the fifth ranking state, North Dakota, they're ranked 34th. Wyoming's ranked 20th. I can go on down the list, and it's a similar note. We pay more, we get more, and we do better than those states with similar demographics. And so I think this argument is getting old, and we can continue to pull these numbers out every meeting, and maybe we will, but I think we get the bang for our buck.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're opening up with comments today, I just want to talk about a couple things. I think probably half of us on this panel, maybe more, we keep hearing this about remedial work at community colleges. And I think you got to understand what that is, and it is going away. In fact, it wasn't around when all of us went to community college, or probably most of us would have been in remedial courses. It's based on a test after high school. And we know that it's a tax on time and a tax on money of families in Wyoming. Community colleges are moving away from it. Okay, so I think to throw that out there, I think is you got to understand the process and what's all involved with it. The other deal, you know, there was a time I think when many of us grew up that graduation rates in Wyoming were hovering right at 50%. That was the time, and now since No Child Left Behind, there's been a real emphasis to move that up. Wyoming has been up in the 80% now for the last 10 years. That's the highest in state's history. Do we want it to be higher? Absolutely. But that's a 4-year on-time graduation rate. I got a kid back this year in my class. It's his 6th year. He's still working. He's going to graduate. Got a 21-year-old who's going to graduate, who receives services. So I think there's always more to that story. Do we want to do better? Absolutely. Have we done a lot better? Absolutely. We built really a fine deal. And I think the NAEP score thing, you know, you can take little averages out of context pretty easily. There's a lot of NAEP scores where we're some of the best in the world. Don't hear much talk about that. So I think it's, you know, the bottom line is 80% of this budget for education goes to people that are with your kids every day. Now, if you think we have too many people or we're paying them too much, that's where the discussion is going to come down to. The bottom line is we have a lot of classrooms in this state. Could we reduce classrooms? Absolutely. I think, Senator Kinski, I think you have 5 high schools in your district. 4 of them you could bus to. Sheridan High School has 400 empty seats. You could bus them tomorrow, close down 3 of those schools. You're going to close down Buffalo, Tongue River, and Bighorn? I don't think so. I mean, when we built Bighorn, it's like it's got its own wastewater treatment pond. I mean, we've done some incredible things in this state. I'm not going to apologize for that. Now, do we got to continue to look for efficiencies? Is it continuous improvement? Is it always working to get better? Absolutely. But to kind of kick this thing and say we've somehow done a poor job and that Utah is a shining example, I don't think so. Utah's got more high school kids than we have population. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at this. We could shut down small town Wyoming. We could take our high schools and cut the number in half. We could bus all of Glen Rock to Casper. Let's have those votes. Good luck. And but if you're going to get, or we can say we're going to pay our teachers $25,000 starting wage. Good luck. You won't have any teachers. They're mobile, just like construction workers and oil field workers. And so at some point where we have K-12 education is the most tied to the energy industry. Nearly 80% of the revenues, because it's all property taxes and it's paid by mineral companies, most of it is tied to the price of oil and the price of coal. So education, so how are we going to fund it? I don't know. We've got ideas. We can probably meet somewhere in the middle and solve the problem if we want to solve the problem. But if you look at other areas, and I had LSO look at this, let's go down the comparative to states. Higher education spending. Wyoming is number 1, $16,746 per student at our community colleges. Idaho's the lowest at $5,900. I don't think we're going from $16,700 to $5,900 in our higher education system. State employees' average salary, we're second. And that max is Colorado at $60,000, Wyoming's at $55,000. Spending for prisoners under our state jurisdiction, we're second. We spend $60,000 per prisoner. The highest is Nebraska at $65,000. Lowest is Idaho at $33,000. I don't think we're going from $60,000 to $33,000. Highway spending per total lane miles, right? We're third. Colorado's the highest. We're third. 40% higher than most of our other people. Spending per Medicaid enrollee, we're second in our surrounding states. $6,600 per person. Okay, and the lowest is Colorado at $4,800. We have the highest healthcare costs in the United States. We got a lot of things that are expensive here because we're big and we're small, and we want to provide a lot of services around this state. There are a lot of tough options we could consider. You could go to one school district. Hawaii does that. Let's have that vote. And so I think and with all due respect, but I've sit and listened to this and listened to it, and I think we got to work on, and I agree, let's keep working on outcomes. We got to talk about 2040, and we got to talk about a way to get there. But I don't want to talk about anecdotes and having some kind of owner's remorse, or we're going to waterboard ourselves because we've done a great job with K-12 education and with our prison system and with our highways and with our higher education system and frankly with our Medicaid services. So thanks for the time to add to that monologue, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Peterson.
Thank you. I'll be brief. We've got a challenge in Wyoming, and we seem to sidestep the issue, and the issue is $450 million shortfall, projected maybe even higher. And I know from Revenue Committee standpoint, we're carrying our tasks out to come up with $100, $200, and $300 million in additional revenue to fund education. We'll present those to the legislative body as a whole come this February. But this committee's task and assignment, and I remind this committee that the fact that still remains is we've got a $450 million shortfall. And we can talk about outcomes, we can talk about adding computer science, we can talk about adding days so our kids are in a classroom more. And everything we've talked about so far has been going the wrong way, adding to the shortfall. And we've grown this budget over the last 10, 12, 15 years. I'm not going to apologize for what we've done in the past. As our good speaker has mentioned, we've built a great system here, but the fact still remains, we've got a spending problem. And for the last 10, 15 years, as I served on appropriations, I kept saying the fact that these are all great ideas, and these are all good programs, but this is unsustainable. And here we are. It's unsustainable. So what do? We come to meetings like this, and we talk about adding programs and adding days and adding, it's la-la land. And to put all the responsibility on revenue and saying tax more, that's not what I'm hearing from the public. I'm hearing somewhere, like the speaker said, we need to meet halfway in the middle here. There's going to have to be reductions, and there's going to have to be tax increases. I've often said that our problem is we're too reliant on our mineral industry. We need to address that. Now's the time to address it. So that's what I'm pushing on revenue. But I can't stand on this committee and say, well, we just can't afford any cuts in education. We're going to be taking a back seat. We're going to be, the sky's going to fall. Our kids are going to be dumb. And that's not the way it's going to happen, folks. And so let's face reality. We need to make some reductions. And that's, I think, why we're here today, is to talk about the funding formula and ways that we can somehow more effectively and efficiently spend our education dollars and save some of those dollars as well, because that's the harsh reality. We've got to make those reductions some way, somehow. So, and because I've been saying that, I've been labeled an enemy to education, and say what you want. It's not true. I think education is the most important thing we can do in Wyoming, but so are jobs. And when we raise taxes, we know what that does to our economy. That stifles jobs. Not in the public sector, not in the public sector, but in the private sector, we take a hit, and it's going to hurt. We talk about diversification. Taxes, higher taxes, stifle diversification. It helps the public sector, but the private sector takes a hit. So the reality is, and the fact is, and it's not changing, as we've got a $450 million shortfall. I'd like to continue to hear what we have to say about our funding model and what inefficiencies we have that we've developed over the last 10, 15 years because we had the money. Now that we don't have the money, we need to review and reevaluate. And that's a healthy exercise. And so, like Senator Kinski said, there's nothing wrong with looking at the budget, facing reality, and making these hard decisions. And these decisions will be made, but I think this committee needs to get serious about proposing actual options for the legislature to consider on how those reductions are going to happen. And if we don't do that, then we haven't done our job as a committee. And to put it all on revenue committee and saying, you know, tax more, tax more, tax more, and we couldn't make the cuts because it's so important. But let's raise another $450 million you know, the survey that WEA sent out about citizens wanting or willing to pay initial taxes. The question maybe been more specifically should have been addressed to and asked as, are you willing to pay an extra $2,000 annually in your taxes? Because that's about what we're talking about here. $1,500, $2,000, $2,500. I mean, would people have been willing to jump at that? Are you willing to take $2,000 out of your annual income to say, I think schools are that important? I think you'd have a different response from the public. So that's the hole that we're trying to dig our way out of. Those reductions are going to happen, whether they happen out of this committee or happen on the general session during our budget session on the floor of the Senate or the House. When reality hits us, that's the decision we're going to have to make. So I would hope that this committee continues to listen to the presentation of our funding model that we built when we had money and find out where those inefficiencies are. But when I hear, you know, and it was said with tongue-in-cheek yesterday about maybe adding days, I just shiver because that's going the wrong way. Maybe a better question would be, how do we keep those students in those classrooms out of the days that we've already allocated in Wyoming, instead of on a bus going to somewhere else for a cross-country meet in Nebraska or Idaho or indoor track, or I can go on and on. I've studied this out. We have a lot of activities in the state, and to me, that means a kid out of the classroom. Homecoming is not just an afternoon of football. Now it's a full day of activities. You know, we play the games of half a day of school, feed them lunch, and I can call it a full day. Those are the things that we need to address. Those are the things that we need to stop right now and become more efficient. And I think as we discover this in this funding model of things that we need to do better, that's a healthy exercise. And I think the public's demanding it. And that's why we're here, Mr. Chairman, and I hope we can continue on and get serious about this shortfall and not put all of it on revenue. Thank you.
Good night. 2 minutes.
Senator Kinsey, let me go first.
Okay.
Just some thoughts. I'm going to try to reiterate and get to the points that I tried to make yesterday. And just a little history here. I'm not sure everybody wants to hear the history of me, but I was president of Senate in 01 and 02, and we had a wonderful lady chair in Senate Education named Irene Devon from Laramie. Did a wonderful job. My follow-up president was April Bremer Kuntz. She called me into the office and she said, "Co, I got a job for you." This is in 2003. "I want you to chair education." I said, "You got to be out of your mind." And I've been chairing education since 2003. We had a model in place called the MAP model, which the good speaker remembers, that districts couldn't make heads or tails of it. We went out and hired a new consultant in Picus and Auden, 2005, and we created that first recalibration, what we call a transparent model. You could see the moving pieces to it. And that's what we've lived with since then. We recalibrated in 2010. The interesting thing about 2010 is that we realized we were spending an awful lot of money on education and didn't need to really make any adjustments in the funding model. So our discussion shifted to accountability. And that's when we passed in 2011 the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act, which is still a work in progress with a couple of years of interruption. I think you all know what I'm talking about. We recalibrated in 2015. In the meantime, the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, and I supported it, and I supported higher salaries, we passed legislative grace, which is, I call ornaments on a Christmas tree, additional funding out there for different things, instructional facilitators, extended day, all this stuff. 2015, we come back in, Picus and Auden recalibrates. 2 years ago, we recalibrate. They come with an evidence-based model, and the legislature chose to support the legislative model, or the model with all of the ornaments on the Christmas tree. In that whole scenario, we've got over 600 teachers that have never been hired that the model funds. Over 600. We've got, I don't know how many people in the health insurance scenario that the model funds that don't utilize the health insurance because the spouse has something else to do. So what I want to see out of recalibration, this is my own personal thing, and I alluded to it yesterday. One of the things we talked about, Michael Donald talked about equal opportunity, whether you live in Sundance or Laramie, for every student in the state, a common basket of educational goods and services. Equal opportunity is the key, but the other word, adequacy. I want to see a model that meets constitutional mandate that talks about adequacy. And in that, I want to look at other states. Is Utah funding education adequately at this level? Is Montana funding education adequately at $5,000 per student less than us at 11? So I want to see adequacy addressed from a financial standpoint, a cost standpoint, remembering that the one dictate we have from the Supreme Court, the model's got to be cost-based. So, you know, congratulations to the committee, congratulations to everybody. We worked like crazy on this. We had a great discussion yesterday. I congratulate those that testified yesterday in front of us, those that came all this distance to participate in this process. As you can see, we're in a dilemma. I think Senator Peterson hit it on the head. We got a $450 million problem. I happen to believe that we need to look at reductions or efficiencies before we look at revenue. Before we look at revenue. The good speaker makes good, wonderful, wonderful sense I'd love to see his football team go to Florida and play. And if it didn't turn out well, he's going to go to the beach anyway. So, anyway, thank you so much. Anybody else like to make a comment? Senator Kinski?
No, no, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to just kind of what we're facing as far as dollars, and if I could, Mr. Chairman, and these are kind of, Craig hadn't come out yet, but this is kind of an early deal, and so if you're just talking an annual amount, and so if you put all facilities together, K-12, state, community college, university, it's about $172 million a year shortfall. The general fund is getting real close. We're almost balanced. We've cut $400 million. We have the lowest general fund budget, and particularly when you inflation-proof it, but in actual dollars in 10-year, inflation-proof in over 15 years. And we've since added a prison with 200 employees in that time. And then K-12 operations about 240 actually is the new number this year, 240 million a year deficit. So that total range in all of state government is about 400 to 450 million a year deficit. So we've already committed the 1% severance tax. That's 80 million. We spent that for most of our history, except for the last few years when we had a lot of money. We saved it, which was helped us get the 4x10 plan and the 8x18 really to the point it is. We talked about the 33% royalties that in the Constitution says should be used for operations. So that's 120 million off of diversion off of that 400 million. We've talked about spending our savings. We spent 160 million a year the last 2 years from the LSRA, and that doesn't count any refueling. It'll refuel at about 80 million a year, but that's a 10-year burn rate. You count refueling, that pushes that out well over 15 years. But if you just stick with those diversions and savings, that's 280 million out of the 400 million. So now you're looking at 120, 140 million dollar problem. You know, you could tax out-of-staters who spend the night in our hotels here. We have the lowest lodging tax in the United States. We have 4 million visitors, Yellowstone. I don't think you go to Fort Collins or Denver or Salt Lake, I don't think anybody's not going because of their high lodging tax. That's 64 million a year right there. 85% paid by out-of-staters. And so I think if we want to solve, and then that's half of your remaining deficit. Then you're looking at 60 million. And so I think if we get creative and we think about this, we can probably find a solution. And then, you know, we cut another 30 million from K-12. That gets you to the 7% cuts, the same as university and community colleges. We're getting real close. And so I hope when I say meet in the middle, I mean not everybody's going to get everything they want, but I don't think we're going to Utah or Montana level, Mr. Chairman. I just don't. And if not, I mean, we're going to spend our savings in 4 years. And I don't think that's acceptable when a solution is within reach by just doing really what Wyoming common sense would tell us to do. And so I think we can get there. I don't think we're going to need 200 million in tax increases or 300 million or any of that. And I think we're going to get very close. So that's an update on the numbers, Mr. Chairman. So that number for everybody is 400 to about 440 a year. Total state government, K-12, everything. That's the number. And then, Mr. Chairman, I just want to, so I'm looking at these salary schedules because that's where all the money's at. So I'm looking at our neighboring states. I just picking out their capital city or a big city where I can find it. And so, you know, like Casper's, one you can always compare to is masters plus 30 because most of these states, Casper's, you got to go masters plus 60 to get to the top. But that's 69,000, masters plus 30. That's what you'd, after 17 years, if you got a masters plus 30. You go to Salt Lake City, masters plus 30 in 13 years, 75,000. You go to, this one's Boise, masters plus 30. What's that do? That's 70,000. You go to Fort Collins, Poudre Valley, masters plus 30, 75,000. Go to Lincoln, Nebraska. Masters plus 30, 82,000. I'm telling you, we're paying starting teachers in Cali, Wyoming, 50 grand for a reason, not out of the goodness of the school board's heart. You're going to have to get people to come here and work. And I'm just, so I think, and we're going to have that discussion. How many teachers we want and what we want to pay them. And in the end, that's going to be a big part of it because we got a lot of classrooms out there. We got them all over the state. And every one of them needs a teacher if we're going to have that many. So with that, when you talk about ghost employees, that $40 million in insurance for ghost employees, districts aren't just burning that in the stove to heat their classrooms. They're spending it. They're spending it on teachers and employees. They pay bus drivers more because they got to pull them out of the competition with the energy industry to get bus drivers. They're paying employees more than what the model resources. We know that. And I think we're going to have that discussion and come to grips with it. Do we want that to continue using these ghost employees to pay fewer people more money, or do we want to say, hey, we're going to pay fewer people more money moving forward? But I think some of the things I hear is we're going to pay fewer people less money. I just don't think it's going to work. I think people will leave. Young people will leave the teaching profession in this state because there is a teacher shortage everywhere. And, old timers might not. They might ride it out a few years. But I just think you are not going to pay fewer people less money. And that's really your options. Unless you're, unless you're going to have fewer classrooms. And that's tough decisions because we're going to have fewer schools. And so it's not easy. And I hope we'll roll our sleeves up and figure out another 120 million or whatever that number is going to be and go to work on that. So, and I agree, I think we can find efficiencies, Mr. Chairman. I think we can. I think we'll continue to do that. So, and I think working with people, we'll figure it out. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any other comments? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just add on to the overwhelming sentiment that we need to do both. We need to do everything. We need to look at efficiencies, we need to look at cuts, and we need to look at revenues. But as someone who also sits on the Revenue Committee, I get tremendous amount of data regarding Wyoming in comparison to elsewhere in the nation regarding all of our taxes, our tax structure, and our revenue streams. And on virtually every element that we look at, Wyoming is one of the lowest taxed states in the nation, whether it be property tax, sales tax. We have no income tax. Virtually every element, cigarette tax, alcohol taxes, right? We can and we should be doing better and fairer, both for our own residents as well as those who are visiting us. The notion of a lodging tax, right? Tourism is our second largest industry, and we have one of the lowest lodging taxes in the nation. So we have to take a good look at those. And I respectfully disagree that doing so would mean that we would no longer be business friendly. We could raise each one of those taxes 0.5%, 1%, 2%, and we would still remain one of the most business friendly states in the nation. We can do that. And certainly what I'm hearing from constituents is that we should be doing it. We should be putting all of those on the table. The second thing I want to address is this notion of what it is that we want our consultants to be doing. And in all honesty, I want you to do your job without us telling you that we want you to cut educational funding or the expectation that you're going to come up with a recommendation that you will cut funding. We chose you because you're different than the consultants that we had in the past. We've had the same consultants for 10, 15 years giving us the same kind of evidence or cost-based model. We asked you to do another highly regarded model so that we would have two that we can take a look at. I don't want to tell you that I expect you to come out with a lower dollar figure. Maybe the figure you'll come out with will be lower, maybe it will be higher. But I do know that our interpretation of the Constitution is that we don't have a mediocre education, right? The interpretation in the Campbell decisions is that we have a high-quality education, high quality, not merely mediocre. That's not good enough for our kids, and I don't think I, or certainly anyone on this committee, wants a mediocre education for our kids. We do not want to go backwards, right? We want high quality, and in fact, I'm really proud that we haven't been sued, right, since the Campbell decisions. Right? That, in fact, I would never argue, right, that parents or school districts shouldn't sue if they're not getting the quality education that we expect from our constitutional mandate. In fact, I'm proud of that, right? I'm proud of that because we're doing the hard work of having and trying to have the highest quality education for our kids, and again, whether or not they live in Sundance or Laramie or here or Cheyenne. So I want to keep in mind as well that we want to maintain, if not enhance, and in fact, we're asking you too, to look at, do we need some changes that would enhance educational outcomes for our kids, because we're not doing everything as well as we possibly could. All right, not backwards, but forwards, looking to, as the good former superintendent said, 2040 or 2080 for our kids. So that's what I hope as part of the outcome. So thank you.
Senator Landon. Then we're going to go to Co-Chair Summers, then I have some closing remarks. Hopefully that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to say a few words before the meeting this morning. Really appreciate the comments of everyone up here. I just wanted to share something. Last night I read a document that that was really discouraging. It was about one of my friends in the legislature who was deemed to be unfriendly to education. And there was a promise from one of our districts that business that he owned would not be supported because he was unfriendly to education. You know, that really discourages me to hear that, because over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, just about everybody up here has been involved with investing in education like no other state. We have worked so hard to try to put extra things into the funding model so that we can try to make that climb that Senator Rothfuss was talking about. There isn't anybody up here on this panel who doesn't care deeply about the future and the sustainability of our education funding. That's why we're here. We wouldn't have agreed to serve on this panel if we didn't care pretty deeply about education. So I hope that such things as I read about last night can be wadded up and thrown away and never revisited, because that's not Wyoming. Here's what we need to do. We're not going to get anywhere with talks about revenue enhancement until we take a real hard look in the mirror. And the time to do that is now. Every other agency in state government has done it. We haven't quite finished doing it here. And it's important that we do this, because we've got to reach a balance point where enough of our fellow legislators are willing to sit down and talk about revenues. And they are not at this point until they're absolutely convinced that the slack is out of the rope. Now, the job of this committee, Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, is to get the slack out of the rope without pulling the horse over backwards. That's a big, big task, and we're going to need everybody helping us to do it. But we've got to be willing to do it, because we can't have the other conversation until we have this one. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Mr. Co-Chair, and then I'll have some remarks, and then we're going to go back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. You know, I guess Senator Landon brought up the slack in the rope. So, and Mike O'Donnell could probably, he knows a lot more about the Supreme Court decisions than I do. But basically, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, is they basically said, you know, you need to hire a consultant to tell you what is an adequate, equitable education in the state of Wyoming. And we have hired a consultant in the past, and that consultant brought back, we put ornaments on the Christmas tree. Last session, we peeled them all off. Because at the end, when it was done, we had actually reduced it below the total level that Picus and Odin, a little bit, not much, it was pretty close. We'd pulled it down to that level. And so right now, we don't know if there's any slack in the rope, and it's you all's job as consultants now to provide us an unbiased look at our funding model to say, how are we funding education in Wyoming? What is that value? What are those things that we need to look at? And then we will have another opinion on what that is. And once we get that, then we can have a further discussion about efficiencies. Do we want to go below what they suggest and run the risk of a lawsuit? We can do that. That's within our power to try to do that if we want to do that. But the first thing we need is the model that they deliver to us before we really get into the weeds on what we're going to cut or not cut or efficiencies we're going to make, in my opinion, because we need to understand what they come up with. And so, just to get you back, we've taken the slack out of the rope. Now we're going to see if there's more slack in the rope or if there's not. And then we need to get on with the business of funding this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just some brief remarks here, and I'll be very brief. This institution is a wonderful institution. And this is, for those that don't know, this is year 29 for me. It's been the most marvelous, rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. Probably the most rewarding thing I was ever involved in was Hathaway Scholarship when we did that. That's still the top of the list. When I look around the room, I see Representative Schwartz, Representative Peperine, and Representative Freeman. We all like each other. At the end of the day, we all like each other. We all work together. And I can tell you what will happen here. We'll all work together and we'll get through this because we've done it in the past. It'll happen. We like each other. We respect each other. I've known the football coach for a long time down there. He and I've worked education issues for a long time. But I have faith in the process, and I can tell you, for those here, this process at the end of the day will come together and make it work. So, thank you. Go ahead and proceed with our agenda.
Laurel.
Oh.
Do we have an agenda?
Laurel Ballard. You started all that. A great discussion, I think, for the benefit of the people that are here, and a great discussion for the benefit of the legislators. Thank you all for participating. Laurel, welcome. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Got it. Much better. Thank you.
Oh, and I forgot Senator Dockstader over there. Dan, good to see you again. So. Please proceed, Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've been asked to come and talk to you a little bit about the Computer Science Education Task Force. I'm going to give you a little bit of history just so that I know we're all, to kind of have an idea of where the task force is and was coming from, and then I can talk about.
I think we have a tab, do we not? Mr. Chairman, under tab U, there's a memorandum that briefly explains some of the recommendations that have come out of the task force that Ms. Ballard will get into. Also in that tab are two memoranda from the department to the Joint Education Committee regarding computer science, and again, Ms. Ballard will discuss those members.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's been lots of discussion about computer science, and so the department was asked, right, through the JEC priorities to look at computer science education. And so we presented our memo, which if you have had a chance to look at it back in June, which is like only 8 pages, so quick and brief read. But it really kind of outlines a little bit about the issues that exist, right? So there is very much a need, it's not only in Wyoming, this is true across the nation, that there is a huge shortfall in the numbers of students coming out of the educational system, not just K-12, but post-secondary as well, that do not have the skills that we need. We have lots of people across the country that are out of work. We have lots of unfilled jobs. The skills don't match. And so we really kind of went back and kind of talked about what would it take to really start looking at computer science education. And in that memo, it really kind of talks a little bit about what some of the realities are. So I'm going to kind of go back a little bit for you with that. So here's reality. We have over 1.1 million unfilled jobs by 2022, which leaves about a $500 billion opportunity or lost opportunity potentially of unfilled jobs and economic development that we could be looking at because we don't have the numbers of students creating that. If you want to look a little bit closer at Wyoming, we're looking at something closer to about 210 current jobs that are unfilled. Average wages are closer to about 61,000 versus about 45-ish around as an average. So we have a much higher salary that goes with these technology, computer science related computing positions. So we're talking around a $13 million opportunity of lost economic opportunity for people across the state that if we start giving them the skills and start creating the workforce pipeline that has these kinds of skills that we could capture within our own state. I really do, I think that that's really important because I'm going to tell you when we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they were saying about 71% of jobs in the future, we're going to be STEM jobs and of the new and fastest growing jobs are the STEM jobs, 71% of those were computing related. Now they're putting that up closer to 73%, and that's only going to continue to rise as our economy and the world economy continues to build more and more and the technology advances continue to increase. With that, let's talk about Wyoming by the numbers a little bit. Wyoming is pretty, even if you want to make some state comparisons, is pretty low on the list of how we're doing in creating opportunities for students with computer science. In the 16-17 school year, we had 3 computer science courses offered across this entire state. 1 IB course was offered, and then we had 3 districts taking dual or concurrent computer science courses. We had in that year 6 of 16 school districts that have certified staff that offered computer science courses. We had 9 of 34 certified staff in the state that were teaching computer science. And we don't have the most recent data for the 16-17 school year, or from the 16-17 school year, but in the 15-16 school year, we had a total of 6 students that took the AP exam, 3 of which passed. So although I like the 50% pass rate, but 3 is a pretty low number. We also, with just even the lack of, besides the fact that we don't have very many, if you start looking at the ability to kind of close wage and gaps and things like that, computer science is one place where we could create a lot of opportunities for students from low-income families, from minorities, and from females. Right? When we have lower wages, with the higher wages associated with computer science, it helps to kind of be able to close those wage gaps. So that's some of the background that kind of took us to why we're looking at it and why the department was tasked with to put together the Computer Science Education Task Force. We were given a request to look at what it would take to achieve 3 goals. One goal was to make sure that we had that students would have access to at least one AP computer, school districts would have the ability to offer, or high schools would have the ability to offer at least one AP computer science course to students. That there would be access to at least 2 semesters of coding course, or which can include dual and concurrent courses. We also looked at what would it take to have 500 students across the state, which, I mean, if we're just talking about seniors, that's less than 10% of students even taking an AP computer science exam and earn the dual concurrent credit equivalent. So those are some pretty lofty goals in reality. I think we heard loud and clear, right? We've got some small school districts, and it's really hard to figure out how to do this. I just told you the stats on how few educators we have with the skills, and so figuring out how do we achieve that, to try to get it so that we have the ability for students to take an AP computer science exam. And keep in mind, right, just necessarily being able to throw a student in an AP computer science exam without any introductory material, it may be a heavy lift. I'm sure if you stuck me in an AP physics class without having taken physics first, I would really struggle. And that's actually sort of what we found in some of the school districts where they threw the AP computer science exam. We had a student talk yesterday about the Coders of the West program, which is a student industry connection internship program. And students who are actively working with industry to do the computer science, this internship with the coding company up in Sheridan. We were also taking AP computer science in their high school at the same time, and we're still struggling with the AP computer science, even while they're actively working on some of those pieces. So I think that we have to be really cognizant that we need to build the capacity long before we get to the that AP and hopefully into the post-secondary realm. So the Department of Education pulled together a task force. If you're looking at some of the memos, you will see a copy of the task force membership. You will see we have a combination of the University of Wyoming, both with staff from the Computer Science Department as well as staff from the Teacher Education Initiative. We have industry partners, both within state and in state government and private industry, as well as we had national partners interested enough that they were willing to come to the table. So Microsoft, Apple, and Apple, I will tell you, does not like to put their name on things lightly. And so that was quite, to me, that's a huge feat that they were even at the table with us. We also had INCAR there. We've got post-secondary representation through both UW as well as Western Wyoming Community College. We have school districts there. We have superintendents there. We have school district and school leadership. We have instructional technology instructionists. We have teachers. We have quite a large group and a well-rounded group really putting some thought to this. And we're really, although there are some real immediate needs right now, they're really focused on how do we do this for the long term and how do we make it something excuse me, Mr. Chairman. How do we make this something that's really sustainable in the long run? So the task force has done a tremendous amount of work in looking at this, and they really started out with some really key guiding principles that went through this. One is that they believe computer science is essential for an engaged and really productive citizenry. The reality is that if you think about cybersecurity and things like that, people are the weakest link. Understanding that if I click on this link, it will take code and put it on my computer that will then lock me out, and I'll have to pay ransom to be able to recover my files or create a hole in my program that I'm using, and that will be able to create security breaches, or understanding the fact that if I click on the link that these computers are connected on a network, and then if I infect my computer, it could infect the entire network and system. And so that even as we talk about that, just having understandings and basic understanding of how this works becomes critical, because more and more of the world depends on these things. And so that knowledge became really, they believe that even just for an engaged citizenry, we need it. They believe that computer science, and particularly coding, is a highly valuable skill for today's jobs. It is projected, even more so in the future, and we're seeing that already, right? Those STEM jobs that move from 71% computing to 73%. School districts have a responsibility, they believe, to promote and provide access to students with computer science and finding ways to be able to provide for students that are interested in those advanced and looking at the career pathways that go into that, being able to provide that. And it shouldn't matter that they're in a small school district or where the geography is or what, and some of those kinds of things. They believe that every student should be empowered to be able to become innovators and creative and creators of technology, not just that they can use it. They believe that early access to computer science knowledge in K-8 is absolutely critical. And if you go out and you look at the research, They talk again and again that if you do not capture students, and especially the low income, minorities, and females, if you do not capture them in K-5, by the time they hit middle school, they're done. My daughter talked about it yesterday, right? She was the one that said, listen, it's great. My mom made me try to do it, and I already felt like I didn't want to do it. I couldn't wait. And then, of course, she is the one with the class that turned out to be a research paper writing and keyboarding class. That's awesome. But the reality, she's a kid that until she figured out it was important to her for the rest of her life, she was the kid that was like, it's not me. I can't do it. And she's clearly a bright and intelligent child that could clearly do it. In fact, while you were talking and the consultants were talking yesterday morning, she was coding a spider chasing me on her screen. And so and it's turned out to be something that she loves, but it's by chance that she's actually taking it now. And she's had to go out and find a way to make it happen because her school district doesn't offer it. They haven't been able to find the way to engage the kids because they're saying, I don't know how to do it. So she's taking it as an online course from the teacher we had here yesterday, from Mr. Ops. So there's that piece. We also know that in addition to computer science, we think as being taught as a standalone. The students talked about that yesterday, the importance of that, especially at those at the high school level and those that are looking at going beyond just the intro to computer science kind of levels. But that to make it relevant and making it meaningful to students, you also have to integrate it into other content areas. And so when we talk about introducing it in K-5, it may be that we teach our current math concepts or current science concepts or some other concepts using computer science. So it may be, the way students we were taught as children to learn math is very different than how they teach it today. And we're saying we may want to look at that. We want to figure out how to do that differently again, because we have some key pieces of that. That finding ways to make it relevant to students is going to be important, especially for our older students that didn't have it when they were younger. And then the last thing was that the state's role is we need to define computer science and then support districts with the resources they need to be able to implement. I will tell you, I have been in our own conversations within the task force. I have been in conversations with school districts. I have been in conversations with industry. I've been in conversations with PTSB when they were looking at the certification pieces. Understanding what computer science is so much, we say it, but nobody really seems to understand really what it is. And so we don't really look at, are we giving the kids, we don't necessarily know if we're giving kids, even when it's happening, full computer science, or why it's, maybe that's why my daughter ends up in a keyboarding class when she was in 7th grade, because we don't, as a, advertise as a computer science course, because we don't really understand necessarily exactly what it is and the breadth and depth of what it could be. So with that in mind, then they came up with those a series of recommendations, or we were tasked with coming up with the recommendations and milestones and a roadmap to achieve those 3 goals that we talked about before. One is that they want to make sure that we elevate the importance of computer science, because I will tell you, I sit in front of industries, and we're getting ready to do it again at the governor's business forum, right, to talk about computer science, because they keep telling me we need K-12 engaged. We need K-12 engaged in making sure we have students that come out with some computer science skills. So we talk about the importance and elevating the importance of computer science. On top of that, we've talked about the fact that we need to define computer science, and then we need to help districts understand what needs to be taught when. Right? So what do we teach when our students are young? What do we teach? How do we build upon that as they get older and older? What do they need to teach at the same grade levels? Because part of the discussion becomes, it's kind of piecemeal. Task force kind of called it like the Wild West of computer science, because nobody knows what to do, and everybody's kind of, this teacher has an interest, and so we teach this little piece here, and that teacher has an interest and teaches that little piece here, and this teacher has no interest. And that teacher over here is really interested and teach about some other component. And that it's never a comprehensive set of knowledge for students. That it's kind of like when I was a kid and I used to take Spanish every year, and it was like I started fresh every year, because It was, we started with hello is Ola, and my name, is Laurel, and those kinds of things. And I keep learning those, and you'd think by now, after that, I would be able to tell you what those are, and I'm not exactly sure I can do that still. The other piece is that in order to do this, we have to train teachers. We have got to put supports in place, and we're looking at trying to train. They want to put something in place that will allow us to train 500 teachers. And with that training comes the appropriate certifications that we need for those educators, so that we have the teachers in the classrooms to be able to teach the students that we want to be able to take those 500 students to be able to take AP Computer Science down the road. So with that, we also had just kind of the pieces that we need to be able to figure out how to get the courses into classrooms, get the teachers into classrooms. And then, and I don't know, I know we talked about defining computer science, but without the state standards. But then we also have to figure out how to get the kids interested. How do we get students interested? I will say when we start young, they flock to these opportunities. You'll hear testimony, I'm pretty sure, a little later that talks about elementary students and hundreds of them showing up to talk about how to think like a computer scientist, right? And in one community. On top of that, so we really wanted to make sure that when we look at this, that we develop and implement programs that are targeted at equity in computer science, because that's a part of that 500 students goal that we had. With that, it was actually talking about we want 500 students with that kind of match at least the demographics of the state, so that so that we're looking at that diversity piece that I kind of talked about. So we had milestones around that, as well as milestones about increasing student engagement, and we see our industry partners being a huge component of this, and finding ways to connect students so they can see that what they're doing relates to the real world. Because I have to sit there, and I do talk to my kids all the time about why what they're learning is what they're going to be doing later in life. They just can't see the relevancy today. So with that, Mr. Chairman, the Joint Education Committee basically, or that task force came away with that with really 4 recommendations for the legislature. There's lots of stuff that we as an educational institution in the state can do without having to ask the legislature for help, but there were 4 things we asked for. One is that the importance of computational thinking and computer science are so critical that we really do believe they need to be in the basket of goods, not buried under career technical education, not buried under applied technology, because if you think about how this works, computational thinking is the big picture. I got to break it down into little pieces. So computational thinking is, if I want to solve the problem of how do I get people to become more active, that's a big, huge, hairy problem. And so computational thinking is the pieces that kind of break that up into small components. Computer science is the application you may want to build, the actual code that takes all these little bits and pieces, and then you put it into the code. The applied technology piece is you send it out to everybody and everybody starts using the app. The people using the app is the applied technology piece. They really believe that computer science itself needed to be on its own. And then we wanted to make sure that we start aligning the graduation requirements, Hathaway requirements, and allowing computer science to count within those. We also asked clearly for the State Board of Education to promulgate standards, which clearly talked about that. And the last piece was we didn't want to ask for funding, but we need funding. And so what we proposed to the Joint Education Committee is to take the current Wyoming Education Trust Fund grant that already exists. It produces approximately $250,000 a year, and kind of restrict that for about a 5-year period so that we can use that money to train educators across the state over the next 5 years, because we're really looking at like a 5-year implementation timeline to start having districts be able to do these things. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is where the task force left you. Since then, the LSO has created the first draft of the bill that addresses these changes. And I'm just going to give you the highlight. Is we really were looking at a 5-year implementation timeline, so we've asked for those kinds of things to be in the bill. I think the important piece, especially based on the discussions we were hearing yesterday, is we do know computer science already exists in Hathaway. as one of the 4 years of the Hathaway Success Curriculum, the task force is going to ask that one of those the 3 years that are required for graduation allow computer science to count as one of those 3 years. We do not want, they really kind of went away from requiring math or allowing math or computer science to count as a math, because we have 3 years of math. And the reality is, if you look at an average student in Wyoming, the average student takes Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry in those 3 years. And so if you substitute those, you will be impacting accountability scores, because you need Algebra 2 for the ACT. You will be impacting college readiness. But instead of looking at it that way, then what they said is maybe allow it to count potentially as a Hathaway 4th year math as a Hathaway. And that would allow some of these alignments. They wanted options for students, right? So you could use it as math, or you could use it as science, and you could use it as a science graduation or a science for computer science for science. I will tell you currently, when I last asked a couple weeks ago when I asked our Hathaway group how many school districts have computer science as an approved Hathaway course under science, and we have no districts that are doing that right now. I will tell you, they may look at me and say I'm wrong, but things may have changed because it's a constantly changing, right? They can update that on a daily basis if they so chose. So those are kind of the big pieces. They definitely loaded the standards, which is in the bill right now. But one of the things, and I still have to go back and look at this as to whether it's a rules change or if it's need to be a statutory request. Normally, once districts or once the state board approves content standards, there's a 3-year implementation period for districts to gear up for the new standards. And so since we know we don't have current teachers, we know we have some work to do. They actually were asking for a total of 5 years out from, instead of a 3-year, for another additional year beyond that for schools to be able to ramp up for it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that's probably way more than you were asking me for, but that is what you have.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Laurel, thanks for coming and giving us a discussion. And I visited with you beforehand, and so my concerns, revolve around my little district, one of my little districts, and whether they'll be able to satisfy it in these times, and by applying standards. So what you and I talked about, or I talked to you about, is, what if we replaced keyboarding and computer applications in the Common Core skills with something? And so that the idea that I mentioned to you was computational thinking. So just tell me a little bit about, or tell the committee a little bit about what that would mean to schools. So what is a skill in this? What is a skill, a Common Core skill? What does it mandate to schools to do? And would that be a first step? Because I guess right now, me anyway, I'm not willing to jump whole hog into this even 5 years out. I think we have, if it's 5 years away, we have plenty of time to come back and have that conversation over the years and put in. But so I guess, is computational thinking a good place to start, or is it one of those other terms that you mentioned? Thank you.
Laurel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I thought about what you're asking, and I've got 2 pieces to an answer. One, I'm just going to say, and this kind of came to me as I was listening a little bit yesterday, I think we have to distinguish what's best for students and what's best for adults. Because I know this is a really hard lift. The task force and the Department of Ed fully understands the kind of lift that we're talking about. And so I don't think it would be fair to just put this out to out to districts and say, no, go do. There's a huge support piece that needs to occur. So one of the things that we're looking at with that is we have just finished the contract for the statewide learning management system, which we're cost sharing with districts. So I took a rather significant portion of our distance education budget and paying for part of that to help support districts. And then I think, so we've got this statewide learning management system available for districts. That becomes really important because I think that especially when we're talking about our small districts, they are going to need help. And so virtual education, our distance education programs, online courses are going to be absolutely critical to being a piece of how we could make this happen. And with that then, I think we heard a little bit from one of the teachers yesterday talking about curriculum, because I think there's not a lot of just textbook out there for this, right? There's lots of resources out there, but nothing just fully just put together other than that's what part of the reason why AP Computer Science is nice, because there's a curriculum that you can just go to. And so I think that there's a lot that we are working on. So we have our learning management system. The Department of Education also has another initiative that we're working on that is all about open education resources, right? So there's lots of educational resources out there that have the Creative Commons license that allows you to kind of take and adapt and adjust. And so we have educators starting to come, we're getting ready to start pulling together educators to look at what are some really high quality curricular materials that we can put together. The class that Zach is getting ready, Mr. Ops was offering right now, is one that we're going to make open and be able to share throughout the LMS. So even if I don't have the curriculum, I don't have the time or capacity to put it together, I have somebody else that has already done it, and we'll be able to share those resources across the state. So there's that piece. If you don't want to do that and we don't want to work on that piece, and we really just want to work on the computational thinking right now, to answer that, which I think you actually asked me, is I think that that's absolutely a critical piece, and you can easily do we've already started incorporating that in the new math standards that are being created right now. There's lots of places, right, because you talk about taking a big problem and chopping it and into smaller pieces. You can do that in any content area and start building that capacity.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to address one of the points that Representative Summers was making in his question, which was an implication that if it's going to take 5 years for us to get anything done, that we've got a lot of time before we really need to do any of the work. I think the implication is if we start right now and put in a strong effort immediately, it'll take about 5 years before we really get everything rolling. So it's not that we can wait for up to 5 years to see an effect and make our changes over time and just patiently parse out the new policy. It's the fact that it's going to take 5 years to get the return that we're looking for, and the sooner we start, the sooner we get there. So I just want to make sure that there is some urgency to this, and that the committee understands that we can't just keep waiting for this to organically happen. That's the approach we've taken for the last 10 or 15 years, and we had 3 AP test passages in this last year as a result of our current policy.
Well, and just to follow up to everything, I'm going to ask staff, the bill that's being drafted for the benefit of Joint Education Committee, is that where we need to go?
Mr. Chairman, this committee could defer to the Joint Education Committee, let them pursue that bill. This committee could work a similar bill. Another computer science bill with different language. That's at the discretion of the committee. I would say that it may make sense to ask APA to cost out, if possible, the cost of implementing this plan, that sort of plan, or some variation on that.
Well, and I agree with that, but also I'd like to hear from the PTSB today. I think we'll maybe get them up shortly here and hear from them, and then meld our thoughts together and try to figure out how we're going to proceed, because I think we had a wonderful Joint Education Committee discussion on this very similar thing, recommendations of the task force and everything like that. So, Senator Rothfuss.
One other point on that, JEC has as one of its interim topics, obviously, looking at computer science education in the state. So we sent along the letter to the Recalibration Committee to take it into consideration during the recalibration. But the working the bill over, in my view, in JEC still makes a lot of sense. But I agree that if we're making a change to the basket and the basket is the focal point for the recalibration, we probably have to at least have them taking a look at that. Even if we don't take any action, just making sure that they're taking into consideration seems like maybe what we need to get done today.
Representative Connolly first, and then Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Ballard, and your committee. A couple of kind of comments or points. First, you've done a tremendous amount of work. I was incredibly impressed with the kids that were here, as well as the industry partnerships that have been put together already. Honestly, we're sitting up here trying to figure out how to implement what you want quicker rather than 5 years down the road, but do it in the framework that we have in front of us, including kind of looking at the skills that are listed, putting computational thinking in rather than keyboarding as a skill, and have that happen as part of kind of our work here. What I'm going to encourage you to do as you move forward is to think about the actual implementation process that we need to do as a legislature, and that includes kind of the statutory changes as well as PTSB. So when I look at kind of what your list is, I mean, it seems like it's great, but it's outside of our framework. And so I think that as we move forward, we need to understand how to better implement what you're talking about here within the framework that we have available to us. So if we need statutory changes, if we need the PTSB, and I think we're going to have a motion that actually addresses having the PTSB act quickly and differently than they have in order to implement some of your suggestions. But I'm going to encourage you, if you agree, that your committee actually kind of think about kind of the law and how we have to implement it as you move forward.
Thank you. Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Dr. Ballard. That was an impressive list of folks on your committee: Apple, Microsoft, Coding.org, NCAR. Passionate about kids being able to have these skills. Odds are good, probably none of them could teach in a Wyoming school. And so I wonder if you have considered, or if you might consider, an alternative model that we give enough flexibility that people from industry who really are at the leading edge of this stuff can teach without having to go get a Wyoming teaching credential from the University of Wyoming and a special certificate from PTSB, because we ain't going to get there that way. I just don't think there's a few like the Powell teacher who are on fire, but by and large, this leading edge stuff, I mean, I've got people in Sheridan that want to teach, and we're just going to start a coding camp outside of the school system and attract kids that are really on fire for it, because we're never going to get this done at the pace of bureaucracy. What alternative delivery systems could we come up with that are going to get us there sooner, faster, with the best content, besides the traditional teacher in the classroom with a certificate from the state of Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, so there's a couple things. We are working on the public-private partnerships pieces. The Professional Teaching Standards Board has several different ways to go through the licensure piece. One thing that they will talk about, and I might mutilate the name, but it's like the professional industry certification, which is exactly intended for your industry folks to be able to come in and teach in the classroom. And basically it says, hey, listen, if you have a certain amount of experience in the field, like, right, so I've been doing this for 5 years, something like that, and I can pass a background check, because that's a big piece of making sure we pass the background checks. Then I can show that I'm going to continue to maintain my skills, not the educational piece, but the my professional skills over the next I believe it's 3 years. Then you can get this professional industry certification. They use it a lot in the CTE courses, where like if you have a plumbing or welding or something like that, and they bring somebody in from the field to do a lot of those, but it can certainly work in this industry as well. I will say that part of what we did with the Coders of the West pilot in the very first year of it, we did a 2-week coding camp One of the industry, and what we did with that was for the boot, we kind of did a boot camp basically, and we had a team taught by a post-secondary, by a college instructor and a industry person. And one of my industry people came back to me too and said, whoa, teaching's hard. Because they don't have the pedagogy, they don't have the knowledge and some of those kinds of things. Some do, some will be natural, right? I mean, some people are naturals at it, and some people need a lot of help and coaching, and some people should never be in front of students. So there is, my point to your question is, there is a pathway that is very like this for industry. They do not have to go through all of that. So there is that piece. When PTSB comes up and talks, they just like I have my task force, the Professional Teaching Standards Board was on this from the beginning, and they actually were able to start before we did. Then they met all summer and they had a combination of industry, K-12, Department of Ed, folks in there, and they have come up with another method to be able to certify educators to be able to get the computer science certification. I will leave you to the details, but I will tell you that they have set up a way so that as soon as I start doing professional development, I can start working in the classroom. I can start teaching it in the classroom. So if I'm a math teacher and want to be able to teach one, and there's an ability in my school for me to teach one class, they would be able to do something like that. All you have to do is be a licensed teacher already for their methodology, for that piece. And so, but they can give you the details around it, but they have found a way to make that quickly. And part of what the task force is working on now, in fact, it's part of what we're going to meet at the beginning of November is our next meeting. And knowing that the Professional Teaching Standards Board already has their rules out for public comment so that they can make the changes that we're talking about to have them hopefully in place by early February. Part of what the task force is doing now is getting ready to build out what model professional development plans might look like, because that's what the districts are starting to ask for. So if I'm going to use this alternative certification method to be able to teach computer science, what is it, could it look like? And so coming up with some models of what that might look like. As well as we are going to start putting together the professional development that we would need to get teachers trained. And so if we have teachers that are going to be able to really have the ability to have a certification to be able to teach next school year, we need professional development starting this spring and over the summer to be able to get them ready. And so that's part of what that task force is going to start doing, is figuring out how to make that happen for educators. And we are really working hard to leverage, the task force is working really hard to leverage those private partnerships that we're starting to build, so that when we can work with Google's been putting money in the state around training educators. The University of Wyoming, some of the professors at University of Wyoming have been training educators. And kind of starting to bring this all together, plus whatever else we can put there, plus the money we have in the Wyoming Education Trust Fund grant, which I like that pot of money because it's not general fund and it's not school foundation. It has its own corpus of money, and so it's a nice compromise, I'm hoping, to be able to kind of help so that could be the state's piece of supporting this effort as well. The state supporting the professional development effort. And so we've been going through trying to figure out how to make all of this work so that districts have what they need, right? Zach has put together an introduction to computer science course. We have instructors in Sheridan. Mark Toney, right, has been working, the chair at the computer science department in Sheridan has been working with the K-12 instructor to help them with those pieces and trying to bring all this stuff together so we can provide resources to districts so that they're not really just starting from scratch and have no supports.
Okay, further discussion with Laurel? Laurel, thank you very much. I think we'll get the PTSB, Nick and everybody to come up right now and comment on what we talked about yesterday, which I assume you understand what we'd like to have you comment on.
Sure, yes, thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Nick Bellack, Wyoming Professional Teaching Standards Board.
There you go.
Thank you.
It's green, I can see it.
Nick Bellack, Wyoming Professional Teaching Standards Board. A pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us up to give you a little bit of an update of what we do. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with just a little bit about our function. As Representative Connolly talked about, how does this actually work in the framework? of does it need to be in rules, does it need to be in statute? Where are we building this framework? PTSB, most people don't know, has actually 3 functions, 2 others besides educator licensure. We approve programs that lead to educator licensure, the standards that those programs have to meet, as well as educator discipline. So should an educator do something that's against our Chapter 9 rules and regulations, we have jurisdiction over their license to discipline it as necessary, anywhere from writing a letter of reprimand all the way through revocation. We also have an interstate agreement through an organization called NASDAQ that we report those educators out to a national clearinghouse. So should that educator want to pass state lines, that educator is in that clearinghouse, so it protects not only students in Wyoming, but also students in the United States. So in
Quick question.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just as you go along, please tell us if you have a federal nexus. So are we mandated federally to do certain things that you have to do, or are you strictly a state function and only look at state rules and regs and statutes? So is there any federal nexus in your?
Mr. Chair, Representative Summers, there is no federal nexus. What we do have is our rules and regulations do mesh with the Department of Education. So certain qualifications have to be met by teachers in order to receive federal funds. I'll also go into the advent of the Every Student Succeeds Act and how that has sort of changed our thinking as well and given us a little bit more flexibility to think about things a little bit differently. So per Wyoming Statute 21-7-303, any person in Wyoming that is going to receive public funds and be a teacher needs to be licensed pursuant to the Professional Teaching Standards Board. Again, our 3 functions are the licensing educators, approving those programs that lead to education, and the discipline part of that. Really, from a foundational standpoint, our route to licensure is a traditional route to licensure. That is typically a 4-year education degree that leads to a standard educator licensure and license in Wyoming. There are some exceptions to this rule. We also have a number of areas, as Laurel alluded to, with the PIC permit, where an industry person can come straight in with the relevant experience. It's 2 years of experience. We also have some exceptions to this rule in terms of getting licensure from out of state. If a candidate has completed a traditional route program in another state within another jurisdiction, if they meet the requirements of that state within that jurisdiction for initial licensure, Wyoming will recognize that license as well. That is our reciprocity agreement. Also, if a candidate has completed a program that's substantially equivalent to the standards set forth by PTSB, we will award them a license. The other part is if a person has 3 out of the last 6 years of experience as an educator, even by an alternative route, if they're fully licensed in any other state, they can come to Wyoming, prove their experience, and be licensed with us. So understanding these functions and how they interface with the profession is important. No Child Left Behind had requirements attached to it. Those are the federal requirements. For those, a teacher needs to have the bachelor's degree and proper preparation in order to teach the content area. But most people don't know that at the advent of the No Child Left Behind, Wyoming had to only make slight adjustments to its licensure requirements. Some of those include having a test for the social studies endorsement, having a test for elementary education, K-6, as well as if a special education teacher wanted to teach and be the teacher of record, 612, for their specific content area, they needed to take the appropriate praxis examination in order to be the teacher of record. So that really assures that the person, and what these are is they're cross-categorical, especially the social studies and the elementary K-6. We're teaching a lot of subject matter in social studies. It's not just history, it's government and politics, it's economics, and there's a cross-categorical representation. And that was the idea behind that. So the reason Wyoming had to only make slight adjustments to its policy stemmed from the standards set forth by the PTSB's rules and regulations. So in short, in line with PTSB's mission statement, it's a core belief that Wyoming students are served by competent, ethical educators who meet rigorous performance standards. And in addition, and because of Wyoming's high compensatory rate, as compared to the other surrounding states, there is comparatively many more interested candidates wanting to come to Wyoming to teach, and they meet those rigid standards that are set forth. I believe somebody had mentioned before, too, of the advent of No Child Left Behind. We were at 50%, we were at 80%, and some of those standards, especially within the educator preparation program and the standards that we hold teachers to, it provides a certain level of assurance that those teachers know their content in addition to the pedagogical practices. So right now, with the advent of the Every Student Succeeds Act, it's been a natural time for the board to consider its rules, its regulations, with the given context. The ESSA plan, I believe, was delivered on July 1st. There's still things to be ironed out with the ESSA plan as well, especially taking away that highly qualified teacher. Highly qualified is going away, but the definition of highly effective is still being ironed out. What does that actually mean? We're still working on that. So with that idea and with highly qualified going away, the board has been thinking a little bit more about the flexibility it needs to offer districts. Namely, the executive director, Nish Goikolea, and I have been going out to districts, putting a listening ear on and saying, what do you need? And one of the resounding things that we've heard is we need science teachers, we need math teachers, especially in the rural areas. So with that, the the Professional Teaching Standards Board, we have about 6 things right now that are either in progress, they're all in progress. Some are a little bit more complete than not. So first of all, and to address really why we're here today, the computer science standards. Again, as Laurel said, we have the PIC permit. The industry people can come right in from the industry as long as they have those 2 years of experience. No pedagogy background necessary. We put them on a permit, it's good for 5 years, and they are good to go. The other option we had was the computer science endorsement. And the problem that we had as a committee and as a stakeholder group is we found that the more a person gets trained in computer science, the more we train them out of being a teacher. Because there's a certain level, if a person can meet the computer science standards that we have as a board, or for most of the other traditional routes in the country, they're going to leave the teaching profession and make 3 or 4 times as much in private industry. Understanding that, we decided maybe there needs to be a stopgap. There needs to be something in between the industry professional, and there needs to be something that's nimble enough to happen immediately, but at the same time allow for a person that has a pedagogy background to get into the classroom to be able to teach some type of computer science skill. So if we go into the understanding of the endorsement area, you can teach the broad spectrum of computer science. So Mr. Ops, as you saw yesterday, is able to teach any type of computer science, and that is absolutely fine for him to do. He will not have an assignment code error. He has the full range to teach whatever computer science his district would like to offer. With this new endorsement that we have out for public comment, we decided to put a lot of the onus and the responsibility on the district and make this very nimble and really find out what the districts wanted to do. As Laura alluded to before, too, computer science is this very, we say it like we know what it means, but we really seldom have an idea of really what it is. Is it coding? Is it computational thinking? Is it knowing C++ or JavaScript? Quite frankly, I don't know, and I'm having to do a lot of homework because of that too. However, what we wanted to do was give the districts much flexibility and have them put an educator already licensed, say a math teacher, a social studies teacher, anybody that has a teacher that has a standard license that predicates this, can get on what we call an exception authorization. And that's a chapter in our rules and regulations that provides for emergency licensure. That exception authorization has a few provisos. Number one, in order to get this exception authorization, you must have a standard teaching license in any content area. Number two, the district and the teacher, the educator, must come up with a professional development plan pursuant to what they're teaching. As long as those things are signed off, sent to the PTSB, the teacher on this exception authorization is allowed to teach in that content area specific to the professional development plan. So the thing that differentiates this beyond the computer science endorsement is that the professional development plan drives the code or the assignment code the teacher is allowed to teach in, whereas the computer science allows the full spectrum of computer science. So with that, that is an exception authorization, and it will be renewable 2 times, so a 3-year exception authorization. Should a teacher complete this exception authorization for 3 years in a row, they would be eligible to add the computational technology endorsement to their license. And that would be added, so in Wyoming we have a standard license to which endorsements are added. So let's say a Math 612 educator would have a standard license with the 612 endorsement on the license. After these 3 years of the exception authorization, another endorsement would be added to that license for computational technology. And as long as that educator holds that professional development plan with the district, that educator is allowed to teach that specific content area in computer science. So that's the one, and really kind of the nuts and bolts part of how that actually works. That is in PTSB rule and regulation, so that would not require a statutory change at all. And that's already in the works. As Laurel said, we expect that to be fully promulgated by the beginning of February. One of the other things that we've done that's very similar to this is dual language immersion. We found out that in dual language immersion programs that are popping up around the state, more flexibility was needed to get teachers that were qualified in the language to get into elementary classrooms. So PTSB worked with a stakeholder group from a few different school districts to develop rules that look very similar. In fact, the dual language immersion rules really influence the computer science rules in their function. So a dual language immersion teacher can come, get on an exception authorization for a few years, and then receive a full endorsement to teach dual language immersion. Another part of this is, as Nish and I have been going out to a lot of the districts, we hear that rural schools really need a little bit more flexibility to teach content areas. And we hear superintendents, principals, even other teachers say, you know, I know this person would be really, really good at teaching this area, but they can't do it because there's this roadblock of bureaucracy. So with that, the board is considering, and this is draft rule language will be presented at our October 30th board meeting to address this and create another stopgap. Right now, currently, we have the demonstration of competency route where an educator can add another endorsement onto their license by completing 27 credit hours in the content area, pass the appropriate praxis, and add that endorsement area to their license. What this would do it would give districts flexibility for 5 years. It's an immediate fix. The educator would receive a permit as a hardship permit. So you'd have to demonstrate a hardship. Again, we're working out the dynamics of this. But if there's a hardship where there is a position that's just not able to be filled, a person can get this permit that's renewable up to 4 times and have this person teach outside of their content area. Now, one of the things, and in line with making sure that all Wyoming kids are met by a competent educator, is that this will have a professional development plan attached to it as well. And naturally, any district asking a teacher to teach outside of the content area would definitely want to support that educator in developing that content knowledge. So this would extend potentially to 5 years, at which point then the educator could have an opportunity to complete the demonstration of competency. So instead of, excuse me, completing the demonstration of competency in only 3 years, we have extended that to 8 years to add an endorsement, 27 credits in 8 years. I'm not the best at math right now, especially on the spot, but it's just several credits a year, very attainable in order to do that. One of the other pieces that we're looking at, excuse me, is working in connection with the University of Wyoming College of Education. Because we're seeing declining enrollment in institutions of higher education, specifically in educator preparation programs, and we're seeing a need in the near future for a lot more teachers, we're starting to think a little bit differently as a board, and the board has had an appetite to look at different routes to teaching. Namely, if a person wants to be a career changer, say they're a mathematician, but they're not a teacher, or they're in engineering and they want to be a math teacher. We're looking at a closely related field and then creating an avenue called a fast track with the University of Wyoming to say that if you're in a closely related field, pass an appropriate content test. Let's develop a year-long program that'll give you a fast track that will lead to licensure within the year. Oftentimes what we find is teachers see that in order to get a standard license or a license in general, it'll take 2 to 2.5, 3 years to actually add that endorsement or get that teaching credential. This streamlines that, and there's also, from what I understand, some pretty good data saying that career changers that do this type of work make very exceptional teachers. The other part that we're looking at in connection with Representative Freeman is career and technical education. As you know, the University of Wyoming stopped their CTE program here at Casper College, and we're looking at an avenue to open up a CTE permit instead of a full endorsement, create a CTE permit so that a person could potentially complete a program at one of our community colleges that would allow them to teach more of the spectrum of career and technical education via a permit instead of a full 4-year endorsement. The other part that we've looked at with creating more flexibility is the adoption of a new math test for our special education educators. It was found that the math 612 test that they were thinking about, well, they had to complete in order to be the teacher of record at a 612 level was far too, number one, hard, and number two, not practical. They weren't teaching trigonometry and the higher level math to the students they were serving. So we, the board adopted a middle school test in place of that, so that those sideboards are still in place, and that's another piece that we did. The sixth and final point that I have to make is we are also have just, and it's in our rules promulgation process right now, to eliminate school licensure from Professional Teaching Standards Board. The reason being is that in order for a school nurse to have a license with PTSB, they first had to have a license with the State Board of Nursing. As we talked with the Department of Audit, Department of Education, Attorney General's office, we found that it wasn't really necessary to have that type of licensure in our rules and regulations. And for those nurses that wanted to be the teacher of record, we had the PIC permit to satisfy that. So we're also reducing our rules for that as well. We're also anticipating and working extremely aggressively towards our new online licensure system. We expect that to happen by December. And I think that's really kind of the updates of the flexibility that we have. I believe I covered the computer science, and I will definitely kind of stand for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks, Nick, and welcome, and thanks for all of those updates. And we really appreciate you guys going in the direction you appear to be going, which is loosen the reins a little bit and let us find solutions that we need out there in these tough times. So a question I have is, you said we didn't need any statute changes. So let me ask, and maybe it's a question for you or Matt. If we wanted to make computer science one of the 3 graduation, where it could substitute for one of the 3 science graduation courses requirements, is that's something we'd have to do in statute, not you guys do? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It need to be used.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our deal, not your deal. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, other questions of Nick? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, thanks for the rundown and very detailed and appreciate it. I'm curious if you could share a little bit of your conversation with the dean down at the University of Wyoming. I've been led to believe by a colleague here that we've got some movement toward an expedited degree for those with a bachelor's degree. Having sponsored legislation that did that for our registered nurses, I'm really interested in that, and I'm encouraged. Where's that at, and when do you expect that people would have that opportunity?
Mr. Chair, Senator Landon, that is expected to be, it's on the ground right now. In fact, it's one of the proposals in the Trustees Education Initiative as we speak. Should it happen or should it not happen, I do feel it's been presented to our board two times already. It's on the agenda for a discussion at our October 30th board meeting as well, and the wheel is definitely rolling. I believe the board has an appetite to add that to its rules and regulations. I'm not going to speak on, the board has not voted on that yet. However, it does seem that the board is looking favorably upon creating that pathway. It would ease some of the hardship. It would change a little bit of our policy as well, but just to give a pulse check, I really don't see any roadblocks in the way.
Thank you, Nick. When we talk about an expedited opportunity, what are we talking about? Are we going to 3 years instead of 4, or can we get it all the way down to something that's doable for somebody who really is genuinely interested in making that career change?
Mr. Chair, Senator Landon, thanks for the question. We're talking potentially a year, potentially 9 months. We're looking at getting that person with that degree, having them take a test to prove their content knowledge, and then throwing a fast track into there. That's inclusive of a practicum, intensive summer session, and then getting them licensed as quickly as possible. Again, one of the functions of PTSB is to assure that a qualified person is going to be teaching. We understand that the content would be, we would have an assurance that the testing would allow a person to know the content. In fact, the test's purpose, if you actually dig deeper into the psychometrics of the test, the purpose is to establish a cut score to do no harm to students. That's what those tests are for. If you know this content, you will do no harm to students in terms of their academics. So once that's done, the pedagogy then is the fast track. Classroom management, pedagogical practices, planning curriculum. Once that's done, the capstone of the practicum, and then graduation. Thank you.
Representative Connolly?
Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick questions. Again, thank you for the excellent presentation. I'm curious about, going back to computer science, you gave the example of a math teacher who could become certified. Could a history teacher become certified in the same kind of way? The answer is just yes. So it's regardless of the original content area if they meet those criteria. And then the second one is, given the new rules that you're promulgating, do you have any idea, any guesstimate about how many either industry partners or current teachers would be kind of attempting to get these kinds of certification from you? What's your kind of thought or hope regarding kind of the loosening up of the guidelines?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Representative Connolly, thank you for those two questions. To your first question, anybody. The superintendent actually of public instruction asked us to be nimble with our rules. And with that in mind and leading the stakeholder group, we wanted to make them very nimble. Computer science is a fast changing subject matter area. In fact, the computer you buy today, everybody says, is outdated before it even gets to your delivery, even if you have Amazon Prime. I mean, it's done. So when we think about that, we think about this professional development plan as we're going to be teaching people new technology, and that technology is continuing to be new more and more and more and more every single day. So it actually almost fits that anybody that has any type of background, preferably a math teacher, because of how coding works, would have that kind of computational thinking. But I'm sure you may have heard in the testimony yesterday, but I've definitely heard it before, that computer science can be attributed to any subject, because it's really about the thinking that happens. It's not the electricity, you're programming the thinking. And really what it comes down to is the acquisition of knowledge. So incorporating that and allowing anybody to teach that in any subject matter area is going to not only help that person and help the district to incorporate computer science, but arguably it would probably help that person in their content area for that computational thinking and enrich their ability to teach their subject matter area. To your second question, I'm sorry, I forgot your second question. I should have written it down. I apologize.
The purpose of doing this is to make more people eligible quicker.
Yes.
And so I'm curious about the numbers that you're hoping to see, honestly, almost immediately once these rules are promulgated, both in terms of kind of the industry partnership as well as allowing teachers to get the certification quicker.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, Representative Connolly, we already have a person trying to apply for this even before the rules are promulgated. I can tell you that right now. In terms of soliciting this, I know as the executive director and I peruse around Wyoming, we're trying to tell and get this message out to as many people as possible. And I think it's starting to work. In terms of what we'll see immediately, that's dependent on what the districts would want to offer. We have opened the door wide to the districts should they want to take on this opportunity. Really, to begin with, I'm not necessarily sure, but I think this will have a compounding effect when it comes down to it. Any application that comes to our office that's going to utilize this avenue is going to be looked at by our board in connection with an outside group of looking at what content is being offered. We hope to develop a body of evidence and then take that evidence and send it out to the districts to say, hey, here's what the other districts are doing. You may want to check from this. If this is a program you want to offer, here's this person. So really what we're trying to do, hopefully, is really uplift what the other districts are going to do. I don't have a check on exactly how many districts would immediately do this, but I would assume, just on my kind of anecdotal data, there's a lot of districts very interested in getting in this.
Questions? Senator Kinsky, then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. So what I heard you say is the federal law, previously No Child Left Behind, mandated highly qualified. And you said Wyoming didn't require much change because we've always had this structure of show me your bachelor's degree, or show me your master's, or show me your doctoral, and show me your various endorsements, and then you're highly qualified. Now federal law talks about highly effective. I don't know that federal law defines that. But is the burden on your department to define what constitutes highly effective and how we're going to measure that in Wyoming for purposes of our ESSA reports?
Mr. Chair, Senator Kinsky, no, that is not within our department. And really right now the highly effective definition is being defined with the Department of Education.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Nick, very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take public comment, and I want to emphasize a lot of the stuff we've covered this morning. We had an extensive public comment on yesterday, and so if you have something to add, please come forward.
Hi, I'm Carla Hester-Croft, and I'm going to give you a community college perspective, Mr. Chairman, and everyone, hello. I am an associate professor of information technology at Western Wyoming Community College, and I am just so glad that computer science is on the table. I worked 18 years in industry. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia. And I've worked for the Office of Foreign Missions, Department of Justice, and Department of State in computer science and information technology. I've been in the great state of Wyoming, which I love, for 15 years at Western Wyoming Community College teaching computer science. So this is another resource that you have as the community college. They're talking about AP in the high schools. That's not only one way to measure the skills of our students in high school. We have dual and concurrent enrollment right now where high school students can take Intro to Computer Science and Computer Science 1, 1010 and 1030 remotely. So if you have students in Baggs or Wamsett or Evanston, they can also take those classes within your 7 community colleges. There's a couple of us that do offer those programs online. So that's another option where you can measure what students are getting in the high school in computer science. You have a great resource as far as faculty go at the community colleges. We can hold the credentials, and most times with the teachers in the high school, if they're wanting to do a computer science class, we can do that class dual with them. Our requirements for that are they use the same textbooks and the content so that when they finish that 1010 Intro to Computer Science and want to go to the next level, that they're prepared and ready for the workforce. We're not just programmers. We are software engineers. We're information technology. We're geoscientists. We're system analysts. We're web developers in computer science. Programming is a component, but you will see now on the top industry sites like Indeed.com, Monster.com, Glassdoor.com, when you're looking at technology jobs, it is booming. There's so many jobs, and just like Laurel was saying, We have a lot of users of technologies, but not enough to maintain and produce that technology. So I am so glad that you guys are taking this into consideration and it is on the table. I also want to give you some options for funding. Okay, we have where we can tie in with industry. Right now, Google, with our districts within the great state of Wyoming, is willing to give districts, each district that applies, $35,000 for a particular professional development for their teachers in their communities. So I think one way is that we can team up with industry to help us with some of this funding. Another option we have is we're doing Saturday workshops. We're in Sweetwater County. We are doing Saturday workshops for teachers, for professional development in computer science. That way you're not having to pay for substitutes during the weekday. We're not taking teachers out of the classroom. They also receive contact hours when they go to that training. Again, we're teaming up with a couple organizations that are helping us with this. Like I said, Google's going to be helping us through the state of Wyoming. Yesterday, I watched you guys live, and for a small nominal fee as a computer scientist, I can make you look better, or I could cut some things out. So I can do anything you want. So I think, you know, I'm also on the computer science task force. I work also with Nick on the PTSB stakeholders. You also have Nish, who was at Western Wyoming Community College, who is now the director of PTSB. So we all have worked together. You have a stellar group of folks. We've got code.org that also provides professional development for us, free to every district. We're starting in Sweetwater County. We're hoping to also, I don't just have Sweetwater County in mind. I've worked with Uinta, Campbell County, you know, PAL's doing a great job. All of us are working together. You have a stellar group of folks, just so you know. It makes me very proud to be in this state. One thing I want to mention is that we have options. You have BOCES that helps out with some of these initiatives. The Board of Cooperative Education Services, who've been phenomenal. Yesterday was mentioned, how do we get the community and the parents involved? Right now we're doing programs that are called, Do You Want to Think Like a Computer Scientist? I thought it was crazy, but I ended up having a big, huge event at the Sweetwater Events Complex. Anybody been there? So we had over 350 students that registered. We had schools compete against each other on who top teachers that participated, top students that participated, just to get the word out about computer science. We have so many positions out there, there's not enough people to fill those positions. And it's not even just that, but computer science is everywhere. Computer science is everything. Those concepts are in every field. It's in fashion, it's in design, it's in animation, it's in game design, it's in networking, it's in developing systems. So it's everywhere. It can be tied into history. If you have in the classroom where a teacher's covering, you know, let's research malaria in Africa. You have the students use their writing skills and write those reports. But guess what? They can use geographical information systems, get online live, and see the outbreak of malaria in Africa. Okay, it's just like the systems we use right now when you can do the map servers and see who owns what. Map servers when you're selling your real estate, Zillow.com. You have your house on the market. You want to see the next house next to you and what they're selling theirs for. Computer science, behind the scenes, working all that out. So I just want to say that we can also team up as districts, team up with businesses. For example, in Sweetwater County, we have Tata Chemical, we have Williams, we have Union Wireless that are willing to give funding if only we would you know, make this happen. Okay, and we've also teamed up with the University of Arizona, we've teamed up with the University of Colorado Boulder, we've teamed up with the University of Wyoming, who offer summer camps as well, not only for students, but for teachers. So these are things that we can do to help with the funding part, is that we can pull from industry leaders. The Business Forum is a great opportunity for us to tie in with those, with our Wyoming industries. Another thing that I'm passionate about is that we keep our students within our state, that we train our students, that they be able to become network system engineers, that they become geoscientists within our own counties. So just like Laura was mentioning, that we have high school students doing internships. We also have community colleges doing that as well. You have a great resource in community colleges. You have faculty that are willing to help. You have community colleges that are working with the school districts within their area. So that's another resource for you to pull from. I think I want to mention one more thing. I just feel, with the educational budgets, that's the best. I think that's an opportunity for us that we can pull to. I was in industry for 18 years, and I know that industry is so excited about being part of that, and also helping us in the classroom.
I was hoping you were going to be enthusiastic.
Can you tell computer science is my passion?
Question for you. First of all, do all 7 community colleges have the same type of computer science initiative that you do at Western?
Yeah, well, there's a few of us that are very passionate about it and that we do take this initiative serious and teaching computer science online. So yes, there are. I wouldn't say all 7 of us. It's about 2 or 3 of us that really do the online remotely. They teach in the classroom. I'm hoping this will push the University of Wyoming to offer the computer science program remotely. And I've been on articulation for 15 years with University of Wyoming. That it is important that someone that's in Bags or Wamset or in these rural places that they can get these classes at a distance. It's very, very important. I do want to give a shout out to the Department of Education within the University of Wyoming because they do offer options to take things remotely. Because for people like myself, we have families, we have jobs where we are, me in Rock Springs. I can't leave that and go to UW and go and get my, renew my credentials or whatever I need to do without it being offered at a distance.
The dual concurrent approach is the thing. I just was telling the coach here, I don't know why I didn't factor in dual concurrent with colleges. This is a wonderful thing that I think has tremendous potential. So.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out about the AP, Advanced Principles in Computer Science, you have the UW doing a course right now for high school students. Well, they'll take it throughout the year, but then they have to pass that exam to comp out of COSC 1010 and COSC 1030. You have another option. I have high school kids right now in my class right now in 1010. You can track that as well and find out how many students are getting their computer science skills through the community college. They take that COSC 1010 for 16 weeks, they get the college credit, the knowledge, and move on. So you have the 2 options that you can track that those skills are being met.
Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Very much.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. Did you say that the University of Wyoming IT department does not offer their courses remotely over the internet?
You are correct. Computer science. Completely online, bachelor degree. They do not.
Seems ironic.
It does. So if you go, so anybody wants to write, anybody?
I don't know, maybe iron is not
And
the
we
right
do
word.
work with a great group of folks there. I just wish there were more options. I mean, we've had articulation where they've mentioned, well, we'll start offering, level 1 and 2. You don't need to do that. Your community college is already doing that. We need level 3 and 4 of those classes offered remotely for our rural state.
And Mr. Chairman, one more quickly.
One more.
So you heard Mr. Balak talk about how at the high school level they have this industry exception, somebody that doesn't necessarily have a teaching credential. They've got some flexibility. At the college level, the way it was explained to me by my college president, I can teach because I've got a doctorate degree. And so there's that requirement. But if there was somebody from industry who wanted to teach at the community college and then by concurrent or dual enrollment, the high school kids could be in there with you. Is there flexibilities for somebody who doesn't have an advanced college degree to be able to teach a credit college course by virtue of the fact they've got all this industry experience? For instance, Bill Gates is a college dropout. My understanding is he could not teach with you at Western Community College. Is there some flexibility that would allow industry people to teach?
And you are correct. I was in industry for 18 years and became an academia, and I think that we bring a different perspective from industry, and I think industry is so important. You know, we give the real world concept. So to answer your question is, you are correct. At the community college level, you are required to have your master's degree plus 18 graduate credits. And the reason we're getting restricted on that is because we're accredited institution, which means we have to meet the guidelines from the Higher Learning Commission to teach those courses. So we have these guidelines that are put onto us as faculty from administration saying you need to meet these to teach our students. However, according to the Higher Learning Commission, if you're teaching at a junior college, a community college, you can have just a degree above what you're teaching, so a bachelor's degree. We go a notch above that and say a master's degree. Okay, now to answer your question, how do we, what we can do is hold the credentials for the person, so that if a high school teacher wants to teach Intro to Computer Science, we can do that dually. So we'd work together on that class. Does that make sense? And
What
that
about-
way they could implement that class in the classroom.
What, so Bill Gates would teach with you?
I hope so.
Seriously.
But yeah, we have some things that we do need to work out as far as that go. I don't have all the answers for that, but we do have to work through those restrictions that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conley, quickly, we're
Yep.
going to move on here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I just pulled up the UW Computer Science Department because I remember about 10 years ago, it moved to the College of Engineering because of the need of industry and business in the state to have electrical engineers who knew how to do computers. It seems like things have changed over time, but know that it wasn't this desire to exclude being able to teach computer science in high schools. It was really a move of a need of industry to have computer scientists who did electrical engineering. But I'm seeing that there are new concentrations in computer science, and that maybe we can work with the College of Education to include one is there as well.
I would highly recommend it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Very quickly.
My name is Sean Roberts. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Code.org. I just want to thank you for the opportunity here. If you're not familiar with Code.org, we're a national nonprofit who wants to make computer science foundational for all students in America. Specifically here in Wyoming, in the past year alone, we've had over 20,000 students access our free and open source curriculum, and over 700 teachers have used it just in the past year alone. And I'm happy to publicly announce here today for the first time that we have a plan and a goal to reach over 250 new teachers through rigorous professional development in the next year, free of charge to the state. So we're very enthused about that and very supportive of Wyoming's plan, both the task force developed, which I was part of, and also the bill that's been developed for the Joint Education Committee. We're wholly supportive of that bill, and hope that this committee will incorporate computer science into the basket of goods. We've invested in Wyoming because we think Wyoming can be a leader in this regard, and think that computer science really needs to be its own thing within the basket of goods to ensure that we're going to make the kind of progress to diversify the economy that we want in the state. If we simply add it under something else or make it like an option that's there, every state does that, and we're not going to make progress in diversifying the economy if we do that. I think it's treading water, and if we don't move forward on this, then I think, to Senator Rothfuss's point earlier, in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, we're going to be having the same conversation and trying to catch up and wondering not only how do we diversify our economy and bring new jobs in computing, technology, all fields, but how do we retain the jobs we currently have in the state? Because as so many others have pointed out, especially students we've heard from, computer science is in every industry, and it's a remarkable opportunity we have here in Wyoming, and it's been a real pleasure to work with the state and the Department of Education, the task force on this. And as I said, I think the question is really, is this going to be foundational for all Wyoming students? Because that's what it's going to take to make the kind of progress we want to see and meet the challenges of not just jobs in the future, but the jobs we currently have in Wyoming. Thank you.
I remember you 2 weeks ago, you testified at Joint Education, so thank you again for your testimony. Any questions?
Just quickly, just one.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. One, how are you funded, and thank you for doing your work in Wyoming.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we're a nonprofit. We sustain our funding the way most other nonprofits do, through private grants and fundraising, donors, things like that. We certainly have industry partners such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google, who have supported us, and many others, as well as smaller donations. We just had a big fundraising ball earlier this week. I'm hopeful that at that event next year we can bring Wyoming up on the stage and point to Wyoming as an example of a leader that's really moved us forward.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think you should be on that stage.
You do?
Definitely.
Really? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John. Any other public testimony? Other public testimony? Public testimony's gone. Committee, we're going to take about a 10-minute break, 5 to 10-minute break. My goal is, I'm still trying to shoot for noon. We're going to take about a 5 or 10-minute break and then come back and see how we want to proceed with what we have in front of us.
So,
Order. A couple of things here. You know, Joint Education has a bill that you heard about today. So I'm not quite sure how we want to proceed, but I think that Representative Nicholas has a motion he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just with a little bit of background first, I mean, obviously, we don't have money to be throwing around at adding new programs and lots of things that we can do with regards to computational science, computer science, and it's going to be a process to integrate it. And it's wonderful to hear that it's happening in the districts now. And we want to do, from this committee, is to encourage that, to do what we can to broaden the scope of it, and do what we can to foster that through means and processes that we can, through this committee, through the JEC, through JAC, and through our collaborations with education. So my motion in that regard is it's basically an implementation. It's a non-financing component of it. I mean, there's no cost to it. So my motion would be to amend the 21.9.101B3C, which it's part of the skills requirement.
Core skills.
And under the Common Core skills, you eliminate keyboarding and you add in computational thinking. So it reads computational thinking and computer application. So that will become one of the core skills that is listed in our statutes. So it has no financial impact at this point in time. It just directs the Department of Education, superintendent, and the schools and school districts to focus on and create a part of the K through 12 that your math and science have some component or avenue that addresses that computational skills. And so that would be the motion, and it's very simple, an easy way to kind of get us on the road towards that mechanism.
Okay, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Senator Landon. We're going to have discussion on the motion. Any discussion? You ready for the question?
Mr. Chairman.
Question being called for. All in favor of the
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, just, Mr. Chairman, just a question about this, and I don't know what the representative, if you have more motions, I mean, there's other things we can do as well, but I think, is this the start of many?
Well, there are several other motions that may come up.
Okay, so I just want folks to, I don't think this is, I guess in my mind, this is not all we're going to do. This is a start. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's clear. Thank you.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be supportive for today. I do look forward to feedback from the education community as to whether we're adding to the burdens. I mean, if I hear from Johnson County or District 3 that all of a sudden they've got to dig up a computer science person and they can't find them, then I'll reconsider. So I'll be looking forward to educational community feedback on it. Second, I thought when I looked at that statute until yesterday, I thought when I looked at the statute, the basket of goods, I was looking at the whole basket of goods. And I found out yesterday that sprinkled throughout our statutes are a series of other educational mandates. And I'd sure like to have a complete list of everything that we're asking of teachers and districts that's above and beyond that basket of goods statute. And, this committee has been loath to mess with the basket of goods, but if there's truly much more there beyond that one statute, I'd like to know about it and see if we might look at trimming things up a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, just comment for the speaker down there, with what's going on with joint education, I think there's a lot more stuff that conceivably could happen, Mr. Speaker, over and above this motion. Any further discussion? Question on the motion. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. That motion's adopted. Any other motions?
Just do a conception.
Any other motions?
So, Mr. Co-Chair, what I have is a conceptual motion, and there may be other folks that want to join in or have different language, but the concept is for graduation requirements, we want to establish a computer science class or computational science which would substitute for a math or science class.
Science.
Or yeah, I guess just science would probably make more sense. And then draft the legislation that would effectuate that.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I think in that, and I think the way the department put it, and I think it's appropriate, is only, right now it's 3 science credits. We would only allow that substitution for one of those 3. And so we make sure we have some diversity in that science credit, that it's not just, would that be a friendly?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Matt?
Mr. Chairman, to clarify,
Senator Office.
are you requesting that this be part of the graduation requirements to satisfy the 3 minimum math classes and science classes? And then also, there's a correlation with the Pathway Success Curriculum where currently law and Ballard testified that science, computer science would count towards science. Would you want to then allow it to count towards math and science for Pathway Curriculum?
We're just doing graduation.
I think we're just talking about graduation at this point, because then it parallels the Hathaway.
And Mr. Chairman, I think science only. We're not going to do math on the graduation piece, science only.
Senator Office.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was actually my question, and I had understood from the motion that we were talking about allowing an or so that you could do it as a math credit also, but that is not part of the motion, so the 3 years of math that would be a graduation requirement would not allow, is that accurate from?
I think that's correct.
Okay, all right, just wanted to check, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kinsley.
I mean, I like the word or, science or math, and I'm curious why only one of those 3. I mean, if a kid's on fire for computer science, arguably those 3 courses, if they pick up one through the community college and one through the high school, arguably it's going to do them more good than trigonometry and geometry, or at least as much good. Why would we not allow them to, what's our objection to flexibility for both the school and the student in substituting computer science for math or science up to three classes? Just help me to understand.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I'm not hung up on this, but the reason is, and I believe the department articulated it pretty well, is we kind of have that set coursework for Algebra 1, Algebra 2, trigonometry, geometry, that leads to what you need to be able to do your higher maths, and so if we trip computer science into that, maybe it gets that child off course. If you want to have the discussion of we've had that discussion many times and failed a 4th year of math, and then it becomes, but then you get into that whole debate on whether you want a 4th year of math, and so that, I think that's the reason right now why I think we want to leave it at science, but I'm open to that debate, certainly.
Chair.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify, is there a second to this motion? Has it been seconded?
I don't think we have a second. I'll second.
Okay, it's been seconded. So, Mr. Chairman, I would, so the motion then is to allow computer science to be one of the 3 years of science and graduation. That's how I understand it. And so I'd like to also amend the motion to allow it to be, computer science to be the 4th year in the Hathaway Scholarship of math, or it'd be math right now. It already says science. So a 4th year math. And that gets away from this Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, which is really the foundation of high school math learning, then taking the ACT and accountability scores and all that. Boy, I don't think there's any appetite to say, hey, kids, you can just take this instead, and you don't have to take Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2. I just think that'd be a real mistake for us, and I think the department testified to that earlier. But this would give some flexibility on that 4th year of math, and be flexibility to districts to count that in the Hathaway. And I think the department talked about that as well. So that's the motion to amend the amendment.
Response to the amendment amenable to?
Yeah, I think that's a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one concern there that I would have is that we know that the remediation rate for students that don't take math their senior year is much greater. And while there is an awful lot of mathematics that goes into computation, it's not the same type that gets you the pass rate on your math placement going to university. So my concern would be the possibility that you would forget your Algebra 2 or your trig or whatever else it is as you're going into that year. Not that I think it's a bad idea, and I think it's a great way to try and thread the needle here, but that would be my concern, and maybe we just talk more about that later. I won't object to the motion. I think it's a good idea, but maybe we can hear more from our stakeholders about whether that's a concern we should be worried about or whether it should sort itself out.
Well, we've got two groups working on it. We've got the education as well as this committee. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will support the motion. I am interested as well in the conversation about the bill as it would come out. I'm curious if it might go in the other direction than what Senator Rothfuss is suggesting by encouraging students who might not have taken that fourth year to actually do it. And so if we have, for example, the history teacher who is doing a great job in computer science in a particular school, that kid who wasn't thinking of taking a fourth year might now and might become eligible for that honors kind of scholarship, never thinking that they're going to do great on a math placement exam or the ACT in math. So I think it could play out either way, so I'm just willing to have that conversation more.
You know, what I like is having a conversation, and so I like the motion. I think we got to lay everything on the table here, and you know, to try to figure out how we're going to proceed with computer science. And I think this the amendment to the motion gives some more flexibility to it.
Mr. Chairman, one other point though is that we're going to add some language that says that the third year or one of the years of science can be computer science in statute. There's nothing in statute that says that that can't happen already. The statute simply says that the state board needs to put together rules and regulations, which we know haven't been put together, regarding graduation requirements, where those graduation requirements shall include, and then 3 years of science is listed. And that's all it says is 3 years of science. And then the only place in statute where we actually talk about what a year of science may look like is in the Hathaway Success Curriculum, where we refer to computer science. So realistically, right now, there is nothing precluding anyone in this room from having as part of their graduation requirements an inclusion of science being computer science. So it may not even be necessary. It may just be that since nobody is teaching computer science classes, this really hasn't come up that much. And maybe that's something else that we can hear as we go forward. Again, let's draft the legislation, but that's another point that I'd like to hear is do the districts feel that something is precluding them right now from counting a rigorous computer science class as a science credit for graduation purposes towards graduation?
I don't know, I guess I would say that we have a lot of opportunity to discuss this out there. So we'll get a chance to talk about that particular item further out there. With that, I think I'll try to move along with the first motion on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, real quick.
Senator Peters.
I just have a question. I want to be clear on what we're voting on here on this proposal, this motion. And the fact is, are we adding another requirement to graduation and attacking the electives that these students, I mean, is that what we're doing with the fourth year of math? Whether it be computer science or math, I mean, are we requiring one more?
Just the opposite.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So right now, maybe he's getting explained to him, so.
The answer is no.
Yeah, the answer. Okay, so if all we're doing is if there's 3 credits of science required for graduation, we're just saying that one of those can be computer science. So there's no addition there. On the Hathaway, for that top level, we're already requiring 4 years of math. Right. We're just saying that one of those 4 years of math could be computer science. So it's just a substitute rather than an addition.
And Mr. Chairman, I think we adopted that as a friendly motion to the original amendment, so when we vote, we're voting on the whole package.
We're voting on the motion as amended.
Right, correct.
Question? Questions on the motion as amended? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. That motion's been adopted.
So, Mr. Chairman, I've got one more. It's not really, one of the recommendations was to use the Wyoming Education Trust Fund grant and dedicate $250,000 to computer science teaching. I think that might be a little bit overreach to say that all the funds have to be used to it. But what my motion would be is to have a letter from the co-chairs to the WDE or the folks that distribute that grant to emphasize professional development for computer sciences with those funds. So, in other words, we're just saying we encourage those grant funds, which are already, we're working off of the income, the corpus income of $250,000, and to direct them to emphasize computational sciences in the granting of those professional development funds.
I think that's good, but I don't think we need a motion to do that, Representative Nicholas. I think unless there's objection, the co-chairs will draft a letter. Ted? Matt?
Mr. Chairman, I just know that in statute there are priorities in these grants, and so those priorities would have to take precedence over
What are they?
Also, it's a but-for motion.
Right.
Further discussion? Senator Office?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's the key concern, is that we've got 21-22-106 that has a list of priorities that are already in place, and I was just trying to pull that up real quick.
Staff have that?
Let's see. So, Mr. Chairman, it's different and improved educational opportunities in elementary and secondary schools, including, and then it's curriculum development activities such as initiatives in foreign language, mathematics, social studies, English, and sciences, operational initiatives such as modifications of schedule, administrative staff development to improve programs such as performance incentives, awards for excellence, acquisition of technological equipment, applied science and technology programs designed to meet future labor market demands. I guess you could say, maybe we could say as a committee that we'll interpret this to be that, and then we'll prioritize that. We ask the department to prioritize it, so maybe that's a way for us to get there directly.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, ultimately the department is tasked with interpreting the law. What the committee says the department should do.
Well, we would ask, yeah.
I mean, yeah. I don't know what weight asking they should carry.
Well, so just going to the letter can say that, then you refer to the language in the statute and just kind of say that the committee believes that computer science fits within the priority that we just talked about, and then we ask them to consider that as a priority to them. So it's just a word crafting of the letter.
So basically, we just send a letter that does exactly that we recommend. And I don't think we need a motion. Okay? Unless there's objection, the co-chairs are directing staff on behalf of the committee to send out a letter. Everybody understand that? Okay, any other motions? Any other motions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, I have to leave. We have a new representative in the House of Representatives, Mr. Evan Simpson from House District 21. As you know, Representative Robert McKim has resigned due to health reasons, and Lincoln County Commissioners have appointed, and so his swearing-in ceremony is at 3 o'clock today in the temporary, not-so-temporary Capitol, the House chambers at the Jonas Center. So I'm going to leave to preside over that. And so I just want to, before I leave, really appreciate everybody's work and everybody on this committee's work and staff, your work. And as we continue down this process, it's going to be, I think we can solve this. And I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, I think what you said about the process, and that's what I always talk about in the House of Representatives, the process works. And so it's important that we honor that and keep working it, knowing that none of us will get everything we want. But this group genius part, the best ideas will float to the top. But I want to say this with caution. All of us are in leadership roles in the state. We will eventually become what we say we are. And it's important the way we think and the way we talk and what our aspirations are. A little sidebar conversation in the hall. We have this mentality, this scarce mentality, this sometimes hunker down mentality. I think we need to reverse that. And I think we know technology is the new oil. We know Wyoming can capture that. And I think it's going to be important for us to kind of take these steps and thinking 2040, as the superintendent said yesterday. And so I think it's really important. I just think the way we think and the way we speak, we can really drive this to a new level of excellence. It's powerful. So, and the other piece of this, I want all of us to think about, and I'm looking at this tab W on page 3, and it talked about stakeholder feedback. Mr. Chairman, it talked about on this common core of skills, they label it in here soft skills, and a lot of feedback from people around the state about work ethic, about self-direction, about accountability, about teamwork, about patriotism, about all these things. We can probably all look at each other. I see a lot of heads nodding in the audience. I think we can all agree these things are important. You know, and half our babies born in this state are Medicaid babies. We got a lot of work to do, and schools play an important part of that. And I think it's important. I guess I want us to think more about that. Maybe we can do something that doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take any more money, but somehow we emphasize, hey, we want our 10,000 school employees to talk about work ethic to the 90,000 kids that are in front of them each day. It changes the 90,000 kids, but it also changes the 10,000 employees, because you are what you think about and what you talk about. And so I think there's a foundational part of that, and I think our stakeholder feedback got to it, but it's a hard thing to try to operationalize it. So as I leave here, I guess a little homework for all of us to think about some of those soft skills. We do those things in our school every 2 weeks. We rotate. You know, now we're just finishing up hard work. Talk to every class every day. 2 minutes hard work. What it looks like. Quotes on it. Things to think about. And and I don't know the exact way to go about it. Other schools and districts around the country do certain things like that. They call it different things. It's called here in tab W on page 3, soft skills. More food for thought, I guess, to think about as we kind of look at transforming how we do business. So appreciate everybody's work. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hit the road. Sorry to leave you early.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your participation on the committee here the last couple of days. Very, very beneficial. And you and I go back a long ways. And like I said this morning, we'll figure all this out. At the end of the day, we'll figure it out, and we'll all be friends doing it. Travel safe.
Yeah.
And are you playing down there tonight?
Oh, yeah. We are. And then we go over to the oldest rivalry in the state of Wyoming, the Casper Mustangs and the Cheyenne Indians. It's like the 110th
Cheyenne
time
Central?
or something. Yeah. So that'll be fun.
Well, good luck to you.
It's all about teamwork.
There you go.
We heard yesterday, teamwork wins.
There you go. Any other, on this particular item, anything else before we go to the next agenda item? Okay, we'll go to our last agenda item.
It's not last.
And Matt's going to come forward and start us on that. Committee discussion on education programming and funding model for the benefit of our consultants. Hey, Matt, is there a tab on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, tab V is in Victor.
Well, that's gotta be one that we got handed out, isn't it?
Should be in there.
Yeah, it was one that was handed out, I think. Wasn't it? No.
I don't have it. Unless it's back here.
That's the, no, you don't have it, do you?
Oh, here it is.
No, that's not it.
Oh, I put it in the wrong place. Yeah.
No, it's not it.
That's not it?
No,
Conclusions,
it's
recommendations?
It's a memo from LSO. Right there.
There it is. I got it. I put it in the wrong place. That's normal for me.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. This is tab V. This is a letter from the Joint Education Committee to this committee. Just some background on the purpose of this topic. Management Council directed the Joint Education Committee as their #1 priority to look at cost efficiencies and possible savings through the funding model, and also major maintenance and capital construction, and provide those recommendations to this committee by November 15th. The Education Committee's next meeting is November 14th, and so this is why you're receiving it at your October meeting. So they received testimony from school districts, the Department of Education, and the Legislative Service Office at both the June 20th and 21st meeting and the September 27th and 28th meeting to identify some of these areas that will be brought forth to this committee, and I'll review those for your consideration. Just some additional background. Chairman Coe and Chairman Northrup requested through an April letter to school districts and their superintendents and board of trustees to identify areas that they believe we could look at some efficiencies and cost savings. They only received 5 letters back from districts, so not a very good response rate. And so at the June meeting, they tasked staff to develop some more creative options that have not really been discussed previously. And part of that reasoning is these, in addition to the funding model that is being recalibrated, these areas then could be further looked at by the consultants. And prior to the presentation today, I've discussed with APA, they will, without even your direction, look at these areas as part of their just review of the funding model. And so I don't know that the committee really needs to direct any work of them. I think they'll do this regardless of any direction from the committee as part of their task, just to review the funding model. So that takes a little pressure off any committee direction here. So with that, I will proceed on just an overview and a highlight of each of these areas and kind of give some context as why they're in there, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. Okay, Mr. Chairman, the first area is regarding the calculation of ADM in the funding model. And some background on this area, back in the 2005 recalibration, the funding model, average daily membership, was amended to provide each school in the model the greater of their 3-year rolling average or their prior year average daily membership. And what this does is it duplicates some students amongst the state. And so when you compare, just even for this school year, you compare the prior year average daily membership to the funding model ADM, you're funding 1,800 to 1,900 students more than are actually in the districts. And so that's because you're using this greater of approach at the school level. And so that's one area where there's a couple options that the consultants and the committee can look at to look at some cost savings. One option would be to make that decision at the district level. So if the district's average daily membership from the prior year is greater than the 3-year average, then all schools would use the prior year. But if the prior year ADM is lower than the 3-year average, then all schools in the district would use the 3-year average. That would still alleviate some pressure on some fluctuations in average daily membership. If that were the case for fiscal year 18, a reduction of $10.8 million would occur. If you were just to say, let's just fund on the prior year ADM, regardless of trying to smooth out that loss of students on the 3-year rolling average, a possible savings would be $17.3 million. So really, the impetus here is there's duplication of students using that grader approach at a school level. Any questions on that?
Chair, I'm just curious about your numbers, and so what you're talking about is if a child moves from one school to the other, then it gets counted twice.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, let's look at it this way. If a school or if a student moves from an elementary school to a middle school, they would be counted in the elementary school they left, use the 3-year average. They'd be counted 2/3 in that school. In the middle school that they moved to, use the current year average. They'd be counted as a student there. So 1 2/3 of a student would be counted amongst the ADM of that district. Now, if both schools are using the 3-year average, then they'd be counted 2/3 in the elementary school and 1/3 in the middle school. So really what you're trying to do is smooth out those calculations at the school level. And if you say, if the district, if you make that grader of decision at the district level, then all schools will use that 3-year average of the prior year, and it helps smooth out some of that double counting.
And so my question, Matt, is because I've gone through the various components of what you call cost savings. And on its face, it looks like, well, maybe we shouldn't be double counting, and so that sounds like a simple answer. But at the end of the day, if 80% of our wages or of our dollars in the block grant goes to salaries, then every time you chip away at something, because in point of fact, the dollars aren't really used for this; they're used in their block as each school district uses it. It's kind of like earlier when they talked about the 41 million in terms of having ghost teachers in essence. But actually it's being spent on something. So every time we cut 10 million or 17 million or 41 million, what we're really doing is we're increasing class sizes and reducing compensation to teachers. And so how do you incorporate that into a cost savings? Because you're going from a model to not, and then you got to transfer it over to reality. So how do you make that comparison so we know what the real impacts are to the average, to the cost and the impacts to small school districts and large school districts? If we cut 41 million, say, because of ghost teachers, and Laramie County, number 1, all of a sudden loses $9 million a year. And where's that cut going to be? It's going to be in teachers. So that, to me, they're not really cost savings in that sense. It's just trying to better articulate or maybe change the model so that we're paying for what we're paying for. So help me understand that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, this is not necessarily a cost savings to the districts. It's a cost savings to the state of Wyoming in the fact that you will fund a lower number of students than to more closely align with actually the number of students in the state of Wyoming. Right now, under your current methodology and law, you're funding for 1,800 students that weren't there last year. And so the recommendation is to, or not, it's not really right, the recommendation from the committee, Joint Education Committee, is to look at this option of either funding on a prior year basis or using that greater of approach at the district level. Now,
So my point is, and I understand that, my point is when ADA looks at this, we need to know what the real impacts is or are, because once it's really a matter of semantics. What you're really doing is just taking money away from the districts. And so what is that impact going to be in terms of the impacts on the ground to each school district and to each school?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman and Representative Nicholas, we can certainly identify each of those decisions on a district level under the current formula and the formula that is provided through APA's analysis.
We can't make decisions without knowing what the real impacts are.
Hey, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And my District Big Piney, I think, is a really good example of why this rolling average is important. A fairly, a small mid-sized district, and their enrollment just declined rapidly. That 3-year rolling average allows them to suck that up a little slower. So it just kind of makes it easier for them to, they still laid off plenty of people. It just makes the crash a little longer. And that was the reason I believe it was put in, because we've had boom bust forever, and I think that's the reason it was stuck in. Is that correct, Matt? Do you know why it was put in originally?
I do, I think. I mean, we had the same problem back in the 90s. The 90s when we had a bust, and we had another problem in, early 2000 something, somewhere in that area. And that's where the 3-year rolling average came from. I'm not sure it was the 90s, but I think it was like in the early 2000s, sometime around 2001 or 2, something like that. Am I right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, the 3-year average just smooths out fluctuations from year to year. That's the purpose of it.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The concept on this point, though, is not an indictment of the 3-year rolling average. It's an indictment of where you aggregate your 3-year rolling average. If you do it on a school basis, you end up with just a mathematical anomaly where a school may be counter-trend to the district in a way that you're not really tracking the right number of ADMs. So the proposal here is to fix that. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. There's the idea that, sure, you can save money by fixing it. You also don't have to save money by fixing it. You could put that same amount of money back in the model, have it be fund neutral, and still fix the problem, because it is an error in a calculation method which generates the wrong number of ADMs. So whether we choose to use this as a cutting mechanism or not, it's a good proposal to fix this, because it really isn't consistent with the intent of it. Whether you support or don't the 3-year rolling average, which I do. I think the 3-year rolling average on decay makes an awful lot of sense. It's still better to aggregate across the district so that you're not counting a student 1 2/3 times.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, I pulled out 2 years in my memo. When looking at the model ADM, which is the average of the past 3 school years, since we always fund on the prior year data. So school year 16-17, the model ADM compared to the actual 16-17 ADM is greater by 1,894 students. When you look at fiscal year 17, meaning school year 2015-16, it's 1,230 students. And if you're looking for the memo, it's closer to the back of the attachment. And so the reason for just even a 600 student jump from fiscal year 17 to 18 is because last school year was really the first year that we've experienced a declining enrollment in the state. And so more districts saw or experienced a decline in enrollment. And so that's why there is such a variation from even one year to the next. When you're having an increase in enrollment, more schools will have a opportunity to use that prior year ADM. But when you have a declining enrollment population, that's why it's such a larger gap between the prior year and your model ADM when it uses that greater approach at the school level.
Okay, Matt, please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next area that I looked at, or the committee looked at, was health insurance, and this has been a topic in multiple recalibrations. And just in basic terms, your funding model generates a number of FTEs, and it multiplies each of those FTEs that are generated by a health insurance amount that's comparable or comparable to the state of Wyoming's insurance plan for its employees. When looking at the school district's insurance plans, about 85% of their employees, when compared to the model, are enrolled in their health insurance plans. So that leaves about 15% of the model-generated FTEs are generating health insurance funding, but that's not being utilized by those school districts. So for the most recent year available, 2015-16, school districts spent approximately $42 million less in health insurance funding that was actually allocated. And so a couple options that the committee can look at is, and this has been discussed previously at these recalibration committees, is to require districts just to participate in the state health insurance plan. Another option that the Joint Education Committee had staff draft up in a bill, and then we'll look at that in November, is to provide districts still the health insurance funding through the block grant, but they'll be provided that amount or the lesser of whichever their expenditures are. And so, and then that'll be adjusted on a prior year basis. And again, this kind of goes back, Speaker Harshman said, well, while they're spending $42 million less, they're still spending it somewhere within the model. And that's just the block grant nature. And so this would be under that second proposal pulled out of the block grant. It'll be kind of treated more as a categorical portion. So,
Mr. Chairman, my question is on this. If you make it mandatory, how does that affect, well, I'll just hold off the question.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next area that was explored was regarding charter schools. These estimates are unknown, and partly because it's more of a prospective look. But the idea here is if a new charter school were to open, it is provided in the first year of operation double funding. So it looks at the enrollment of that charter school, and it is provided that enrollment times 2, whatever the district funding level is. And one of the recommendations or options there is prospectively, if a charter school were to open, you wouldn't provide double funding for that first year of operation. You would just provide an enrollment times that average daily membership in that district. The reasoning for that is it's not a benefit that's provided to a normal school within the district, and so it's part of a cost savings measure that could be evaluated. The second cost-saving area would be to look at the expansion of grades in charter schools. Again, normal schools, if they were to expand a grade, they get that funding on the prior year. In the charter school instance, they get that in that current year. And so whatever that enrollment is for that year, if they go from a K-5 elementary to a K-6 elementary, that 6th grade elementary is funded immediately that current school year, rather than a normal school would be funded on the prior year. Again, this would be a prospective cost savings. It's unknown of what that would be.
So, Matt, Mr. Chairman, do you have an estimate of what it would be or what we've been spending in the past?
Mr. Chairman, I believe what has been spent in the past is around $4 million on each of these areas. That's slightly lower. On page 6 of my September 15th memo, it's on each of these adjustments in total, since the 2002-03 school year, $6.8 million has been provided on each of these adjustments.
Annually or total?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, in total.
So it's really not like...
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative, it's not a lot of savings, but it's an amount that prospectively could be saved if a new charter school would be opened.
Thank you.
And part of it part of it is just a fairness issue that we've heard. So that's just where that's coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, this is the one that confuses me the most with the charter school recommendations. It seemed to me that this was honestly a way that we saved money by not having charter schools start out by artificially inflating their numbers by having K through 6, for example, in my district with the new Montessori school. Right? They would get double the number if they started with K through 6, but said no. What we want to do is get a kind of a robust K through 3, and then allow those third graders to kind of go up and have a fourth grade, and then a fifth grade, and then a sixth grade. And it would make absolute sense that we would need to pay for the teacher for the new fourth grade, for example, as we have in a new K grade. So it seemed to me that this one actually made sense and saved us money. And to not do this would either prevent charter schools from expanding, or it would hurt us because they would artificially inflate their numbers to start with. So I'm curious about the recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, part of the recommendation is looking at just the difference between a charter school funding and a traditional school funding. They would be funded for that the following year, and so it's not like they would not get funded for that expansion of the grade. They just would be funded the prior year. This is just a benefit that isn't provided to normal schools. Additionally, enrollment is about 1.5 times larger than an average daily membership, and so when you're funding on enrollment versus average daily membership, there is a slight larger amount, and so that could be adjusted, I guess, at the end of the year if you wanted to precise it. But those are just a couple of the thoughts there.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And during the Education Committee, I had some concerns about the recommendations related to charter schools. And my view on the recommendations, we put together a charter school funding system which was different from the block grant, and it is kind of unique, and there are probably some flaws with the system, and we could do a lot better if we worked on it. But the reality is it is a system that was designed to allow for the startup of charter schools, whether you think that's a good idea or not, and 2, for that first year, allow them to have sufficient operating cash to actually exist. So that's why you front fund it. You can't back fund it for a new charter school, because that means that the charter school actually has to operate in the red for an entire year, which is obviously a challenge because they're not directly funded by the school district. At the same time, the FTEs that are moving to the charter school were probably, for the most part, FTEs, not entirely, but for the most part, that were already being counted in the ADM count for the school district in the prior year. Therefore, they're going to be funded to the school district. So one of the problems we may have there is a tracking and kind of a triple counting problem, which you could work out. So I'll just stop there before going too much further in the weeds and say that we might need to fix the way we fund charter schools, but if we implemented all of these changes, we just wouldn't have any more new charter schools. I think it's a bigger policy decision than simply trying to correct the funding. It would wipe out the possibility of charter schools applying and existing. And again, that's a policy decision. That's something we could talk about if we don't want any more charter schools. But I don't think any charter school could come into existence if we implemented these recommendations unless they were massively generating their own independent wealth. So it's a bigger topic than simply trying to look for a place to save some money, and it would probably be something we would need to look at in an interim and entirely redesign the funding mechanism for charter schools if we want to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next area within the memo relates to what we consider co-located schools, and these are schools, multiple schools, 2 or more schools within a single building. For example, I think I put in the memo in Albany County 1, there's Rock River Elementary, Rock River Middle School, and Rock River High School. They're all located in a single building. Another example is up in Meeteetse. They have Meeteetse K-12 school. They have just configured themselves differently as 3 separate schools in a single building. And so one of the recommendations here is to ensure that if a building is housing a configuration that it's treated in a similar situated. So if Rock River and Meeteetse have the same number of students and same type of different demographics, they should be, in theory, treated equally. But in the Rock River case, and how the funding model works, they are resourced 3 administrative positions. And so one of the recommendations could be to cost savings. And I think APA will look at this as part of their equity analysis. And I think that's some of the confusion that maybe Chairman Summers has had is, what does this equity analysis look like? That's kind of what they're looking at is kind of on a building level. Are students same size being treated equally? And so one of the recommendations could be an option for this committee to consider, and the APA, they'll review this, is looking at these co-located schools and eliminating any co-located schools. This is done on the routine maintenance side and on the major maintenance side. They look at it at a building level. So when we resource routine maintenance through the block grant, we aggregate these schools to the building level, and in the major maintenance formula, we aggregate that to the building level. And just for reference, in the memo, I identified there are 54 instances of these co-located schools. 47 of those schools share the same administrative staff. So districts are already utilizing these administrative positions to resource these buildings. The model just provides additional administrative resources for those buildings as well. The estimated savings on this piece would be about $4.1 million. The one caveat on this recommendation is the Joint Education Committee did not recommend a bill draft piece on this. And so they felt that, I think maybe they wanted to recommend this, that the Select Committee evaluate this, but the Joint Education Committee was not going to take up this recommendation.
So, Matt, could I get a, why did the JAC not get a bill draft for this?
Senator Office, I can't remember.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My thoughts on this and what we talked about in the JEC was, while this makes a lot of sense, and it really does make a lot of sense to implement this policy, when you look at how the policy is borne by a small number of school districts that basically through coincidence end up having a large change in funding, it's a mechanism for saving $4.1 million at the expense largely of Fremont 21-24 and Bighorn 1 and 4. So it's brutal on a small number of relatively poor districts. And so JEC thought that while we probably should find a way to change this, maybe through the entire recalibration process so that it's more equitable in the future, just correcting it for next year is disproportionately penalizing a small number of districts, and they couldn't absorb those changes. So it might be more fair to change it, but the reality is that it's too painful.
So my question is, you could change it, but you could make it incremental and occur over 5 years or 6 years. So you could still have the bill draft, and so you get the school districts moving in that direction.
Senator Office?
And the other point we discussed, though, is realistically we're doing a recalibration right now where an entirely different funding model may come out of it. So if we don't choose to adopt a new recalibrated model, then amending our current model over the next 5 years makes a lot of sense. If we do end up adopting a new model, then it should obviate this problem in some way, whether that's painful or not. It will take care of it. So the other thought was that we probably needed to see what happened with recalibration before we worried about it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Matt, APA is going to look at all of these issues, and so we're really, we're just kind of reviewing what you've looked at, and then they'll take a look at all this stuff, and we'll come back with recommendations, I assume.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And again, this presentation is in response to the Management Council directive to have an Education Committee provide you recommendations, and so that's just really satisfying that requirement.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the largest amount there is Bighorn 1, which is in my Senate district, and was that considered, because that particular school district has 2 campuses in Burlington, and is that, when we talk about co-located schools, this other campus in Burlington's 45 miles away from, so, these consolidated districts.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Peterson, no, we are not considering separate campuses and separate cities. These are individual buildings and just how they're configured. So,
Okay.
and I don't have the schools in my information here today. I had it at Joint Education Committee. I forgot to bring that file here. But we're just looking at actual buildings within schools configured within a building. And so my assumption is Bighorn 1 has multiple buildings like this with multiple co-located schools, and that might be the reasoning for the higher number in that district.
Yeah, they have one. It's the high school / middle school, which the state forced with the building model to combine those schools. So there is but I think we have the business manager from School District 1 here could answer that question, but I think there's only one principal in that building. So I don't know why that amount is so big, but and then they have an elementary school in that same district. But
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Peterson, I'll look at that for you
Okay.
and I'll get back with you.
appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman, this is prevented in the law in the future. So in the 2010 recalibration, there was an amendment to law that schools could not reconfigure to have multiple co-located schools. This is all historical anomalies that have retained their existence. It is not something that has been a new outgrowth of schools. And so that's just, there is a mechanism within the statute that does prevent this from happening, but this is just a historical remnants of the old way we funded. Mr. Chairman, I think I have about 15 minutes between presentation and
Is it okay if we finish up and then we'll finish the agenda and get out of here?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next item is the block grant has a specific amount for formative and interim assessments. It is $25 per ADM. However, the Department of Education's new statewide summative assessment contract has a provision in there for YTOP, their new assessment, to provide districts free of cost funding for interim and formative assessments for grades K through 10. And so part of the area here is it's a duplication of funding. The state of Wyoming is paying this through the block grant at $25 per student, and then now we're paying it through the assessment contract with AIR. And so one of the recommendations as a possible cost savings would be to eliminate the funding out of the block grant for the formative and interim assessment, and districts then can utilize the assessments in the statewide assessment contract. And partly this recommendation comes as those now are aligned to the statewide summative assessment. The tests are K through 2 are fixed form assessments, and then grades 3 through 10 are adaptive assessments, and they're aligned to the statewide standards. Districts do utilize other formative assessments, and so if a total elimination is not the way to go, then maybe a lower amount may be the way to go. And the total, again, here is about $2.3 million. In reality, it's 0.2% of the total block grant guarantee. So it's not a lot of money, but it's a portion of it. Well, Mr. Chairman, when I look at this as part of the $530 million deficit on a biennial basis going forward, and so it's $2 million of that $530 million that would not have to be either diverted from the LSRA as current law provides or some other revenue diversion. Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next area is groundskeepers. There are certain sites in the database through school facilities division that districts own property that have large parcel of acres. And within the memo, I identified Laramie County School District number 1. They have 2 sites that total 644 acres. Part of the background on this is during the recalibrations, we've been provided recommendations on how to resource groundskeepers. How the policy has landed for the past years is districts are provided the entire acreage that they own for groundskeepers if it was acquired prior to 1997, July 1st, 1997. if it was acquired after July 1st, 1997, it is subject to the School Facilities Commission's groundskeeper, or not their groundskeepers, but their site acreage allowable calculations. So there's kind of two different philosophies there. Further, the current model provides for different levels of support, whether it's a elementary, middle, or high school. The high schools and middle schools are a resource a little bit more to maintain those facilities, partly because at those levels you have football fields and track fields, and they're larger parcels of land. So these kind of what we refer to as these large parcels in the Laramie 1 instance, they have two large parcels that are kind of this ag farm that they utilize for instruction with their ag students. But these two sites in Laramie 1 generate 30 groundskeeper FTEs, and the remaining 46 sites generate 37 FTEs. And so these two sites generate about $1.8 million. One of the options in here, and APA obviously will look at this, is if you retain your current formula, maybe some of the options that they can evaluate is how we do this for custodians is the education buildings generate the custodians based upon their gross square footage and a couple other factors, but then the district level custodians are just 10% of the education related custodians. You could look at this maybe the same way. You know, these don't have school buildings on them, so maybe your school building sites would generate their groundskeepers, and then non-school building sites would be generated at a 10%. Another option in here we looked at was, major maintenance formula provides funding for non-school related square footage on a much different manner than for their central office warehouses or administrative offices. They do it in kind of a ratcheted amount if there's a certain percentage, if their district level square footage is a much greater proportion than their education square footage, they are resourced at a lower rate or a lower percentage of that total gross square footage if it exceeds their education. So those are some options that can be explored. That's just the big elephant in the room on the groundskeepers. Mr. Chairman, the next area is related to special education. We touched on this briefly yesterday. The districts in both transportation and special ed, and we know this, APA is evaluating these two areas. Their main recommendation was to evaluate current rules and regulations with the Department of Education and maybe look at those and tighten those up and allow for some efficiencies and cost savings. The one additional recommendation for special education was on the extra hazardous designation for special education teachers and certified related service providers. Back in 2015 session, this was amended. The extra hazardous workers' compensation was amended to include teachers and related service providers. The estimated cost from the Department of Education was $3.1 million to implement this. We have been directed by Joint Education Committee to work with the workers' comp division within within the Department of Workforce Services to see if there's any way to amend this language to not just grab all of the special education teachers. I remember doing this fiscal note, one of the issues with this is when you do workers' compensation, it's based on a class of employees. It's not a specific employee itself. And so we're going to see if we can amend this language a little bit more narrow to take care of maybe the large increase for extra hazardous designation for special education teachers. But I know this was an area that school districts also recommended for the committee to explore. On transportation, one additional area that districts discussed, and I think this has been a theme through the past couple of recalibration, is the lease purchase agreements. We pay interest on leases for buses. One of the recommendations there would be just to outright pay for those buses rather than do lease agreements, and that approximately would save $500,000 to $700,000 annually in that category. Okay, if there are any questions, I'll move to the next area is related to advertising costs. This was another recommendation from school districts. This is not necessarily a savings to the states, but it's a savings to school districts. And so Education Committee was provided a list of statutes that require districts to report in publications and newspapers. And so really, we'll go back and look at some of these and identify a couple of these that really do require a lot of reporting in publication of newspapers. Again, this is no cost savings to the state, but it could be a potential cost savings to districts in a time that their budgets are reducing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on that front, Matt. Is that part of the statute which relates to all governmental agencies being forced to publish all of that information, or is that a rule and reg under the Department of Education?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, on the September 15th memo within that tab, on page 12 and 13, there's all the statutory citations that require school districts publication. So it's within Title 21 where those requirements for those districts to publish.
So Matt, do we
That's
have
okay.
an estimate of how much it will save the school districts?
Yeah.
Is it a big deal to them?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, on page 13 of that, Table 11 identifies total districts' advertising costs, and they equate to in 2016, fiscal year 2016, they were $824,000 for the year, which equates to 0.06% of their operating costs. One caveat, and I mentioned this to the Joint Education Committee, not all these advertising costs are related just to the requirements within statute. These could be related to recruitment of bus drivers or teachers or some other publication that they have. And so take these, with a grain of salt, that they're not all related to just the requirements of statute, but a majority of them probably are. They're required to publish each warrant over $500 in the legal newspaper. One of the thoughts, I think, we'll come back with the Joint Education Committee, maybe increase that, and that was one of the recommendations, I believe, from Sheridan County School District Number 2, was increase that to $5,000 rather than every $500 warrant, maybe increase that to $5,000. Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next, this is the final one that's related to the funding model, and it relates to the teacher extra compensation adjustment that's really outside the block grant. Wyoming Statute 2113-324 allows districts to provide additional salaries and benefits for unique circumstances. So if a school is rural in a district, they may pay additional travel stipends to teachers to go teach out there. Over the past 10 years, funding has, about $2 million of funding has been provided. But when looking at the data, about only 4 districts are receiving these dollars. 88.3% has been paid to 4 districts. Campbell County 1, Johnson 1, Laramie 1, and Natrona number 1. And so, part of the other concept here is, the regional cost adjustment is supposed to take care of regional differences in salaries. And so this might be an area where the legislature may want to repeal. And so that's an area that the Education Committee will debate at the November meeting is a repeal of this statute here. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final item in here is related to major maintenance funding, and it relates to charter school leases. And this is a unique area where, in lieu of major maintenance funding, if a charter school is operating successfully for 3 years, and has been approved by the Department of, or by the district to operate in their district. The state of Wyoming will reimburse their lease amount in lieu of major maintenance payments. The Select Committee on School Facilities was charged to review with this as part of their interim study. There really was no recommendation on how to put charter schools back into existing square footage within the district. But what's happened is for the next biennium, there is going to be potentially 3 leases. One will be in Albany County School District number 1. For the biennium, the School Facilities Division is estimating that'll increase about $12,782 or 8.2%. But in Laramie County School District number 1, the estimated increase for the Potter Academy is going to increase 30% or $192,599. And so one of the options that, rather than not pay them major maintenance would be just to fund them major maintenance, and that could be utilized for their lease agreement. And if that were to be the case, the estimated or potential savings would be around $257,000 for under fiscal year 18 estimates.
And that's just for the size of the
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, correct. And so it's based on the allowable gross square footage, and then that's multiplied by a replacement factor. That, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. And just to summarize where the Education Committee ended up at, they recommended almost all of these to be drafted into some piece of legislation, except for on the ADM piece. They did not forward on the prior year ADM recommendation. They just wanted to look at the district level greater of approach. And then also they did not recommend any legislation on the co-located school being eliminated within the funding model and have those just funded at the building level. So those are the only 2 recommendations that were not, or the options that were not forwarded to this committee or drafted for legislation. Mr. Chairman, I think the only thing you may have left is to take public comment, maybe on this portion of the agenda, regarding any directives to staff, if you have any additional directives. And then a reminder, the next meeting has been changed to November 29th, 30th, and December 1st.
Mr. Chairman, we do have to, if we're going to make any other changes to the basket of goods, we probably ought to do that. Correct? Isn't that what, that's what that agenda item is?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you have any other directives on any other agenda item, whether you want to have staff draft additional amendments to the basket of goods or give us any other marching orders, we're more than happy to take those today.
Yeah, I want to emphasize in the public comments section that this is just what Joint Education Committee has done reporting back, and we had extensive public testimony in front of Joint Education 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, Mr. Co-Chair. So do we need to do any more other than take public testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we do unless somebody's going to propose a change to the basket of goods, and then we would have to act on that. I mean, I think that was the one thing coming into this meeting is we had to provide that direction to the APA so they can then cost out whatever we decide is the base.
So with that, I think we'll take public testimony, and I'd emphasize what I just said about this is just reporting back for what Joint Education is doing. Is there any public testimony? Don Dealey. I'm going to ask that everybody be brief and concise if you can and get right to the point.
Thank you, Chairman Cole. Don Dealey, Campbell County School District. I guess if we're going to be very concise, I would tell you that I would like this committee to send a message to the Joint Education Committee and the legislature and say, hey, you know what, we got this. We want to give our consultants a chance to do what they were hired to do. We're going to stand by their findings. We don't need a lot of additional guidance on tweaking the funding model right now. Let them do their job. Let them come up with what education in Wyoming should look like and how much it should cost. We don't need all this guidance. You know, I'm especially concerned about the, let's talk about the health insurance bills. Obviously, they're going to harm certain districts much more than others. And why is that? Because school boards over decades and decades have come up with compensation packages for their employees that best fit their districts and their communities. Some are benefit rich, some have higher salaries and lower benefits because they feel a need to constantly attract new employees, new teachers to their district, and they need to do that with higher salaries. So I look at these bills and they're going to be punitive. They're going to reward districts who spend a lot of money on health insurance, obviously, and really hurt districts who don't. We always have to get back to the fact that the funding model is simply a proxy. It's a way to get money into the hands of a school district in a fair and equitable manner. There is no such thing as a ghost employee. You know, districts are going to be affected a lot by something like this, but the bottom line is that you are getting deep, very deep into the local control issue of school boards and their ability to design their compensation packages. What you would do if this legislation is passed is saying, school districts, you've got to be the premier employer in your county, in your district, when it comes to health insurance. You've got to offer this very rich package in order to get 100% of your employees to take that insurance. So what's got to give? Well, you either got to lower salaries to do that, or you got to stuff a whole bunch of kids in a classroom and keep the salaries the same. That's the kind of reality that we're looking at. So all I'm asking you to do, let these people do their job, give the people behind me some confidence in this committee that you are going to honor the work of APA and stand by their findings.
Thank you, Don. Just a comment. This is on a bill that the Joint Education Committee has. And we were charged by Management Council to look at, and none of us have voted necessarily on any one of these particular items, but we're charged by Management Council to look at efficiencies. That's why we have them all. But this is a Joint Education Committee bill, not a recalibration bill right now.
That is correct, and I appreciate that, Chairman Cole. And again, I would really like this committee before me to send a message to the Joint Education Committee to allow you went through a lot of work to form this committee, to find APA who you've hired to do this job. I would just ask you to tell the Joint Education Committee, hey, let us do this work. Let our consultant do their work. Don't interfere. Let them come up with a product and cost it.
Other public testimony? Briefly, if you can. We're kind of under well, we got a few minutes, but not a lot. If we can finish up here before Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ed Getz, Business Manager for Albany County School District. Mr. Deely has taken a number of comments that I want to make about health insurance. Again, I recognize that the Joint Education Committee has taken this issue up, but it is an extremely critical component of the funding model and of what is part of employee compensation. So I just like to say that I want to speak in favor of maintaining the flexibility of school districts to control health benefits and not be forced into the state system. An important item that needs to be taken into account is that there is a requirement to subsidize retiree health benefits within the state system. For our district, particularly, if I understand it correctly, it's 0.6% of the payroll of the school district. That would cost us $215,000 a year in order to subsidize retiree benefits, effectively forcing us to cut the equivalent of 4 teacher FTEs just to subsidize retiree health benefits. So the other part of my comment is that we have a very good health plan right now, and I would say that as a result of free market competition, we have a very good health benefits system in our district that allows us to, as Mr. Deely said, pay higher salaries, even though our district is probably the closest to the model of any large district. But we still make those trade-offs in order to attract teachers into our district. Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, I just want everyone to know that I think this committee's committed to APA producing an unbiased report to us. These issues are issues that have been identified by Joint Education Committee. They're just issues as far as I'm concerned. APA will look at them and deal with them as they see fit. Ultimately, whether JEC or us go beyond or do any other tweaking is after the fact, but it's APA's job to look at everything independent of what the chatter is around them. And I know that'll be difficult, but that's still their responsibility, and I believe they're competent enough to do that.
Well, and I'm going to speak on behalf of Joint Education. I think Joint Education is committed to the same thing.
Mr. Chair, what I'd be curious to know, just to have the data, is the impacts of each of the proposals on each school district. I don't know if you presented that to JEC or not, but it's, for example, if health insurance issues would impact certain ones, school district in Campbell County more than they would in other places, that would be useful information just to understand in terms of what the recommendations are. And so I would ask you, the school districts, perhaps to help put those numbers together. I mean, each of you would probably have calculated what those impacts are. And I just think it would be useful information to have for me. I just want to do a few closing comments, talking about what we're doing and where we're going with this. What I didn't really hear this last 2 days is a lot of input and involvement from the educators on how you would resolve our funding issues, and you know, we talked about this in our prior meetings, asking the educators to come up with your own plan or concepts on how to effectuate certain amount of cuts if it happens. And you know, there's a divergence of opinions between the Senate and various House members, and you know, and it goes all up and down the board. And there's lots of different ways to skin this cat, depending on what happens through recalibration, with funding, with tax increases, and what comes out of, what we're able to pass through the House on a two-thirds vote. So I keep looking back and saying, it's wonderful to have experts tell us what to do. But at the end of the day, the people who are most capable of telling us and probably have the most expertise are you. And without your help and your input, then we're going to tell you what to do. And I'm just going, well, are we getting the best bang for our buck? And are we doing the best thing for our students? And are we saving the money, using our money most judiciously as we can for the betterment of our kids? Because they're the most important thing we have in the state of Wyoming. And so we need your help. We need your input. In reality, there are going to be some reductions in overall costs. We have no option but to do that, I think. And so we just have to find out how to get there. And if it's going to take, I think it's going to take you and collaboration and basically linking arm in arm to fix this thing instead of us trying to push you off the cliff and vice versa. So I just hope we work more in that direction and continue to do so. So appreciate your time.
Thank you, Representative Nicholas. Any other comments? Okay, Matt, future meeting dates?
Mr. Chairman, November 29th, 30th, and December 1st, we'll be at the Oil and Gas Commission. That was the first meeting, July 25th.